Summer, let's get a divorce. In the third year of concealing her identity as the heiress of the wealthiest family and marrying the billionaire CEO Julian, he proposed a divorce. Julian's tone was as calm as if he were discussing a trivial daily matter, while Summer was so shaken by these 5 simple words that she could barely stand steady, unable to resist glancing at the woman standing beside him, all because she had returned. 3 years ago, Vivian had gone abroad to pursue her dreams. Rejecting Julian's marriage proposal, at that time, as the eldest son of the Liu family, he was filled with arrogance and pride. Yet, the very next day after Vivian left, he hastily found someone to marry. Summer chose him for a simple reason. He came from an ordinary background with no connections. So even if they divorced in the future, it wouldn't pose any threat to him. For 3 years, Summer tiptoed through her marriage, doing everything she could to please Julian. Hoping that one day her devotion would break through his distant exterior, she poured herself into the role of the perfect wife, believing that if she worked hard enough, she could find her way into his heart. But all of her efforts unraveled the moment Vivian returned. Everything Summer had done suddenly seemed meaningless. Julian's dark eyes betrayed no emotion. It was true, no one could deny that, despite her humble background, Summer had played the role of a devoted wife to perfection. Yet what Julian really wanted was a partner who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him, someone as accomplished and ambitious as himself. In his eyes, Summer simply did not measure up. He was dissatisfied not only with her background, but also with her quiet, unassertive nature. To him, she was like a timid rabbit, always clinging to others for support. Without a hint of hesitation, he set the signed divorce papers on the table. Sign it, name your price, whatever you want. I'll give it to you. The coldness in his gaze made Summer feel as if something was lodged in her throat, making it hard to breathe. 3 years of marriage, tossed aside as if they meant nothing. As she sat there in stunned silence, Julian pulled out a check and placed it in front of her. Here's 10 million, is it enough? Summer felt a surge of bitterness in her heart. After a long silence, she asked in a hoarse voice, for years, what exactly am I in your eyes? Am I just the invisible one who has to endure you bringing back your white moonlight, or a pitiful creature who can be dismissed with 10 million? Or perhaps someone who, even after giving up everything to love you, can't get even a shred of response? She had tried so hard for 3 whole years. Even a stone should have been warmed by now, but how could he so easily trample on her dignity and ignore her deep affection? Faced with her despairing expression, Julian remained calm. I told you when we got married, you'll be my wife, and I'll give you the status of a wealthy lady. Beyond that, there's nothing else. These words felt like a bucket of cold water poured over her head, chilling her from head to toe. Beside them, Vivian, seeing this scene, deliberately pretended to feel dizzy and collapsed into Julian's arms. For years, I feel so dizzy. Maybe I drank too much at the party earlier. As expected, Vivian immediately captured Julian's full attention. Making him ignore Summer entirely, he coldly left behind a single sentence, sign the divorce papers and leave as soon as possible. Then, he carried Vivian upstairs in his arms. Summer watched helplessly as he carried Vivian into their shared bedroom, feeling as if all the blood had drained from her body. She stood frozen in place, stiff and numb. She realized now that she had been wrong from the very beginning. Julian was never the right person for her. He closed his eyes. Tears slowly sliding down his cheeks, the sharp pain in his chest making it almost impossible to breathe. It was time to face reality. He reached out, picked up the divorce agreement on the table, and signed his name stroke by stroke. Then, he took the check and tore it into pieces without hesitation. He didn't want a single penny from the Liu family. He had been too naive in the past, but from now on, he would never foolishly give his heart away again. After finishing all this, Summer packed his belongings and resolutely left the Liu family. Outside the villa, a downpour was raging. He threw his apron and all his luggage into the trash, as if bidding a final farewell to the foolishness and helplessness of the past 3 years. Then, standing in the curtain of rain, he coldly dialed a phone call and said, "Take me home." 20 minutes later, hundreds of limited edition luxury cars roared through the night rain. The grand procession, with the deafening roar of engines, startled the Liu family's servants. A group of servants rushed out, only to see the dust kicked up by the departing cars. Could they have been mistaken? Was the person just taken away by those luxury cars really the young madam? When the servants returned to the villa, they happened to run into Julian, who had just finished putting Vivian to sleep. Finally, one brave servant couldn't help but speak up. "Young master, it seems the madam was just taken away by hundreds of luxury cars." Julian frowned slightly upon hearing this but showed no excessive emotional reaction. Julian's expression remained cold as he said without looking up, "The Liu family doesn't need servants who spread nonsense." The servants were startled and immediately realized their mistake. The young madam came from a rural background, with only a middle school education. After marrying into the Liu family, she had been mocked as a sparrow turned phoenix. Because of this, the young master was dissatisfied with her, and the Liu matriarch also had many complaints. How could she possibly know people who drove such luxury cars? Moreover, they could tell those cars were exorbitantly expensive. Even one was rare, let alone hundreds appearing at once. They must have been mistaken. To keep their jobs, the servants quickly apologized and never dared to mention the incident again. On the other side, hundreds of luxury cars sped toward a grand estate. Dozens of bodyguards disembarked in an orderly manner, first opening the door of the lead stretch limousine before standing respectfully on either side, waiting for Mr. Li to emerge from the estate. Upon confirming it was indeed him, Summer's face lit up with overwhelming joy. "Young miss, you've finally returned." Summer smiled faintly, her tone carrying a hint of authority. "Uncle Li, I'm back." Shortly after, Grace also came out to greet her. "Chen-xia, is that you, Summer?" Noticing the additional streaks of white in her mother's hair, felt her eyes redden. "Mom, I'm sorry, I was unfilial. I'll never run away from home again." 3 years ago, she had fallen in love with Julian and, upon hearing he wanted a wife with no background, had disregarded her family's objections. Changed her name, and married him. She had thought she'd found true love, only to be heartlessly betrayed. Now, she had finally come to her senses. She was, after all, a phoenix among mortals. How laughable it was that she had willingly caged herself for a man these past 3 years. Summer's capabilities were well known to Grace. A dual-degree Ph.D. from Harvard, she possessed both strategic acumen and boldness, hailed as a business prodigy. Yet 3 years ago, she had chosen to step back from the limelight for love, trading boardrooms for kitchens. Seeing her now with renewed clarity, Grace grasped her hands excitedly. "You've finally returned. Over these 3 years, Shen Group has weathered multiple crises under your cousin's leadership." Summer, recalling her frivolous cousin, was unsurprised. A cold yet resolute gleam flashed in her eyes. "Don't worry, now that I'm back, I won't let him have his way any longer. Shen is grandfather's legacy. I won't allow anyone to lay a finger on it." The news of the young heiress's return to the family spread quickly throughout the entire Summit Group. Ever since the former chairman passed away a few years ago, he had handed over the enormous family business to Summer. Known for her decisive and powerful leadership, Summer quickly cleaned house during the company's most critical moments, removing anyone who tried to take advantage of the situation. But just as suddenly, she disappeared from the public eye. Now, with her return, everyone at the company was curious about her next move. Eric, who hadn't seen his cousin in 3 years, was convinced he had secured his place as the company's president. Even as rumors of Summer's comeback echoed through the office halls, he remained planted in the president's chair, unmoved. In his mind, what could a woman possibly do to threaten his position? After all, it was that old man's stubbornness that handed everything to her in the first place. A decision Eric had always resented. 3 years ago, when Summer left, she had a strong team of loyal executives. But Eric, leveraging his own status, forced them all to resign and aggressively seized the interim presidency. Now, after working so hard to claim the title, there was no way he was going to let it go easily. However, the office door suddenly swung open, and 4 black-suited bodyguards entered. Silently beginning to dismantle his office supplies, even lifting his boss directly to prepare to throw him out. "Stop this right now." At that moment, a woman in a Chanel suit, with black hair and red lips, walked in. Summer removed her sunglasses and chuckled softly. "Cousin, this is my welcome gift for you. Do you like it?" "Summer, how dare you kick me out?" Eric turned livid with rage. Summer slowly pulled out a document. With this, Eric took one look and was instantly speechless. It was the will left by their grandfather, clearly stating that Shen Enterprises was to be inherited by Summer. "But for the past 3 years, I've been the one managing Shen Enterprises," Eric argued. "You managed it." Summer stared at him coldly. "How much has Shen Enterprises lost in these 3 years? And how much of the funds have ended up in your pockets? Do I need to present a detailed report to remind you?" Eric froze instantly. How could he have forgotten? Before disappearing. This cousin of his was a top graduate from Harvard, one of the successors their grandfather had held in the highest regard. "While I'm still not planning to pursue this further, you'd better leave now. Otherwise, if I demand you return all the money you've embezzled over the years, you might end up bankrupt," Summer warned. In the end, Eric could only slink away from the grand feast. Summer officially took over the group, but the situation he inherited was far from optimistic. As his mother had said, the fact that Sheng-yi had managed to avoid bankruptcy under Eric's leadership in recent years was solely due to the company's solid foundation. He barely slept for several days, struggling to sort out the work of the past few years. 3 days later, his secretary pushed open the office door and said, "President Yoon, there's a business dinner this afternoon regarding an investment project." Originally, Vice President Yoon was scheduled to attend. "Will you be going?" Summer frowned in thought. He had no intention of stepping in for Eric at social events, but upon hearing that several company CEOs would be attending, it was clear this investment project was highly attractive. After weighing the pros and cons repeatedly, he decided to go in person to assess the situation. "Help me arrange it," he said. Meanwhile, at Tianza Group, Julian's assistant walked into his office. "President Liu, Sheng-yi's eldest daughter has recently returned," he said. Julian looked up. A flicker of interest in his eyes. He had heard the legendary tales of this Sheng-yi heiress. Years ago, after the death of Sheng-yi's chairman, a young girl had been thrust into the spotlight. Facing the covetous gazes of various factions, she had stabilized the situation with decisive actions, deterring those who sought to take advantage. Clearly, she was not someone to be underestimated. Years ago, Julian had been interested in collaborating with this heiress. But she had suddenly disappeared. Now, she was back on the stage. Noticing his boss's apparent interest in the new president, the assistant added, "There's a dinner tonight that has invited you. It said Sheng-yi's new president will also be attending. Would you like to go and see?" A faint glimmer passed through his dark eyes as he responded calmly, "Let's take a look." In the private room that evening, Summer arrived somewhat late. When he pushed open the door, the atmosphere in the room instantly grew quiet. Dozens of men in crisp suits turned their gazes toward this unexpected guest. Summer showed no fear, walking in calmly and introducing himself. "Good evening, everyone. I am the new CEO of Sheng-yi Group, Summer." With that, he picked up a glass and poured himself a shot of baijiu. "I apologize for my tardiness. Let me make it up with a drink." He downed the high-proof liquor in one go. The men present, seeing this, praised his boldness. "President Yoon is truly a straightforward person," they said. "We've long heard that the eldest daughter of the Yoon family, the wealthiest in the country, is extraordinary. Indeed, the rumors don't do her justice. President Yoon, please take a seat. Tonight, no one leaves until we've drunk our fill." Summer sat down amid the crowd, exchanging pleasantries while quietly listening to their discussions about investment matters. The leader of this investment venture was a man named Vincent. Reportedly an elite returnee from Wall Street, from the moment he met Summer, he kept emphasizing the rarity and potential of this project in his ear. Before long, someone mentioned that President Liu of Tianza Group hadn't arrived yet. Summer paused slightly. Julian was coming too. Just then, a waiter's voice came from outside the door. "Excuse me, President Liu of Tianza Group, we're here." Julian stepped out of the elevator and followed the attendant into the private room. To his surprise, all the other guests inside were male. The highly anticipated female CEO was absent. For some reason, he felt an inexplicable twinge of disappointment. He apologized softly. sorry for being late. Meanwhile, outside the room, Summer, after drinking several glasses, was being helped into the elevator by another man in a suit. Parker looked at him with amusement and teased, I couldn't find you for 3 years, and yet we meet by chance at a bar. Yoon Chen-hsia smiled faintly. This just proves fate still ties us together. Parker was his childhood friend. Earlier, Summer had tried to leave but was stopped by Vincent. Fortunately, Parker happened to pass by, recognized his voice, and promptly took him away. The two arrived at the underground parking lot together, with Parker driving his Maybach to take Summer home. The evening breeze brushed against their faces, bringing Summer a sense of relief. Upon hearing that Julian had also come, Parker asked, Did you leave early just to avoid your ex-husband? When she heard the name again, Summer expected to feel something, but her heart remained surprisingly calm. No, she explained, I just thought there was something off about that investor. Parker grew serious. You mean the one who returned from Wall Street, Vincent? Summer nodded. We talked for over 20 minutes, and all he emphasized were high returns and interest rates, without mentioning any risks. His resume looks impressive, but it seems too perfect. Why would a Wall Street trader who's never failed suddenly return to the country and bring what looks like a free investment project, claiming it's charity for Rongqing? After hearing this, Parker also felt something was amiss. He approached my grandfather a while ago, but my family is conservative and unwilling to get involved in such investments, so nothing came of it. Now that you mention it, it does seem very strange. Summer shook her head, believing that the most taboo in business decisions is blindly pursuing profits. Therefore, regardless of whether Julian appeared or not, she decided to leave. The next day, Summer instructed her assistant, We will no longer follow up on Vincent's investment project and will cancel the cooperation. The assistant looked at her in confusion. But I heard that several other companies have increased their investments. Are we really going to withdraw? Summer nodded firmly. Withdraw? This decision gave the skeptical board members an opportunity, and with Eric fanning the flames behind the scenes, the entire group secretly gossiped that the new female CEO was just a figurehead who knew nothing about business and had let the company miss a great opportunity shortly after taking office. Despite this, Summer paid no attention to the idle chatter and continued to focus on her work. More than 10 days later, news broke that Vincent had disappeared with billions in investment funds, leaving no trace. Investigations revealed that he had been a financial fraudster in North America, specializing in scamming large companies. Upon returning to the country, he immediately targeted Rongqing. In this scam, only 2 companies emerged unscathed, Shengye Group and Julian's Tianzi Group. This outcome left those who had initially questioned Summer unable to criticize her any further. At Tianzi Group, the assistant entered Julian's office to report the matter. President Liu, you were right. Vincent turned out to be a fraud. That night, in the private room, Julian stayed for only half an hour before sensing something amiss and leaving decisively. Faced with this outcome, he wasn't surprised, believing those who fell for it had only themselves to blame. The assistant added, It said the female CEO that night also left early. She was the only one, besides you, who was tricked into investing. Her again. It seems this young lady's mind is as sharp as ever. Even after 3 years, he couldn't help but wonder, how could the previous acting CEO, also a cousin, have made such a foolish mistake? Tianzi and Shengye had originally planned to collaborate this year, but due to Eric's misconduct, Julian refused to deal with fools and ultimately abandoned the partnership. Now, it seemed worth reconsidering. Casually, he said, Reach out to Shengye and see if they're still interested in the cooperation proposed earlier this year. Yes, however, Shengye responded swiftly, brief and firm, no interest, no consideration, no cooperation. This blunt attitude made it clear that Shengye's young lady was extremely reluctant to work with Tianzi, but Julian didn't mind. As a leader in the industry, he had no need to speculate about others' thoughts, so he didn't dwell on it further. Shia, this time you've saved Shengye hundreds of millions. How can you not reward yourself properly? Pei Youngjin Summer had been buried in work since returning home, but at the request of his mother, he was specifically pulled out to go shopping. Summer wasn't particularly interested in shopping, But not wanting to disappoint his mother and friend, he followed Pei Yang to Rongqing's largest mall. As they stepped into a luxury shoe store and gazed at the dazzling high heels in the display cases, Summer actually began to feel a slight interest. "That's more like it. Look at you still wearing shoes from 3 years ago," Pei Yang remarked indignantly. "Is the Liu family short on money? Julian never spends a dime on you." Summer lowered his eyes slightly, his thoughts seemingly drifting to the past. Pei Yang, thinking he had touched on a sore subject, happened to receive a phone call. With an apologetic wave, he stepped outside to take it. Summer couldn't help but smile faintly. He had merely been reminiscing just now. After browsing for a while longer, he stopped in front of a pair of dark green classic silk high heels. "Could you show them to me?" The sales assistant took out the shoes. And Summer instantly fell in love with them. Just as he was about to try them on, a familiar yet sharp voice suddenly came from behind. Summer, Linda, and Vivian, the moment they stepped into the store, they recognized their former daughter-in-law. Seeing them, Summer didn't show much reaction, merely glancing at them briefly before turning his attention back to the shoes in his hands. Linda immediately flew into a rage. This country girl who used to fawn over her in the past now dared to ignore her after the divorce. She sneered, "Using the alimony from the divorce to buy luxury goods, even if you wear designer brands, you can't hide your shabbiness." Summer frowned and retorted, "I didn't take a single cent from your family. If you don't believe me, go ask Julian." Linda acted as if she had heard the most ridiculous joke. "A poor country bumpkin like you wouldn't take our family's money." Summer, who had once endured humiliation for Julian, was no longer willing to tolerate it. Just as he was about to respond, Vivian spoke up calmly from the side. "All right, Auntie, don't let this ruin your shopping mood." Linda snorted coldly and turned away to look at other shoes. Just a few minutes later, Vivian also took a liking to the pair of shoes in Summer's hands, which happened to be the last pair in the store. She walked up to Summer and said in a seemingly friendly tone, "Miss Yoon, are you going to buy these shoes? I'm quite interested too, but if you're not planning to, I'd rather not buy shoes someone else has tried on." Summer found the remark dripping with sarcasm. Yin Shui appeared gentle and kind on the surface, but her words were like a soft knife cutting deep. "Miss Yin, you sure talk big. One might think you own this store." Vivian immediately put on an aggrieved act. "I was just worried you'd try them and not buy them. That would be such a waste." At that moment, Linda approached again. "Who would want to buy shoes after someone like you has tried them on? You claim you didn't take my family's money, but can you even afford these shoes?" Summer was about to lose her temper when a cold voice came from behind. "Wrap these shoes up." He walked over to Summer and added to the sales assistant, "And how many more pairs of this style do you have in stock? We'll take them all." Summer felt it was unnecessary to make such a scene and gently tugged at his sleeve. Parker, however, said, "It's fine. Better than sharing shoes with someone of questionable character." This remark was clearly directed at Vivian, whose face instantly turned crimson. However, faced with Parker N's unyielding attitude, even Linda could only glare at him with a livid expression. Who was this man, willing to spend so much money on Summer? After the shoes were packaged, Parker took Summer by the hand and left, completely ignoring the presence of the other two. Watching their retreating figures, Vivian said meaningfully, "It seems Miss Yoon has found a new patron. No wonder she didn't ask for the money during the divorce." Linda spat out hatefully, "What does it matter if she's latched onto someone new? At most, she's just being played with." The Liu family's Julian toyed with an exquisite wooden carving he had found in the bedroom. A lifelike little deer, the craftsmanship was incredibly delicate. Clearly not a mass-produced item but a meticulously handcrafted piece. The bottom was engraved with the character Yoon. Could this be Summer's work? How could a woman from a rural background with ordinary education possess such skills? Julian frowned slightly, lost in thought. In the past, he had paid little attention to Summer's affairs, knowing only her name, so he naturally had no idea whether she had such talents, but recalling the past, he did remember her often carving something out of wood. For some reason, he hadn't discarded this piece of art. Perhaps because it was too exquisite to simply throw away. Julian opened the wardrobe and placed the wooden carving at the very bottom. His gaze inadvertently swept over the neatly arranged clothes, which were carefully categorized for different occasions, complete with matching accessories. These were prepared for him when Summer was still around. She always considered his busy schedule, pairing suitable outfits in advance for various events, formal wear for workdays, elegant attire for social occasions, and sophisticated ensembles for evening banquets. Each set was simple yet tasteful, no less impressive than the work of a professional stylist. At this thought, Julian couldn't help but frown slightly. Was Summer really just an uncultured country girl? The question had barely surfaced in his mind when the door suddenly opened, and Vivian walked in. Julian quickly closed the wardrobe. "Is there something you need?" Vivian, who had been slighted by Summer earlier, seized the opportunity to complain. "Nothing much. But Auntie isn't very happy." "What happened?" Julian asked. Vivian bit her lip and said, "We ran into Summer at the mall. She was with a man who looked quite wealthy, and the two of them seemed very close. He even talked back to Auntie a few times." A man. A strange feeling stirred in Julian's heart. The woman who had once been so obedient to him had now found new support. For some reason, an image of Summer's gentle demeanor in front of him flashed through his mind. Would she act the same way with someone else? Despite this, he responded coldly, "Since we're already divorced, there's no need to pay her any mind." With that, he strode toward the study, but Summer's name, his wood carving, and the newly appeared man kept swirling in his mind. He realized that he seemed to have never truly understood his ex-wife. Moments later, he picked up the phone and instructed, "Help me investigate someone." After a brief rest, Summer threw herself back into work. Parker still came to see him from time to time, either inviting him to meals or proposing outings, which left Summer somewhat exasperated. At noon, Parker came to Shengye Company to see him again. Summer said expressionlessly, "I don't do lunch dates, golf, or racing." Parker feigned hurt. "You're so cold. I even prepared a surprise for you." Summer finally gave him a glance. "What surprise?" Parker smiled mysteriously and showed him his phone. On the screen was a private foreign forum filled with discussions about wealthy Chinese-American wives, criticizing Silver Select and including hotel photos of Vivian with someone. "That white moonlight in your ex-husband's heart is quite the socialite in North America. Rumor has it she's hooked up with at least a third of the wealthy husbands there. She only returned to China because of her tarnished reputation." Summer browsed through those posts for a while, feeling that some of the images were too explicit, and quickly closed the page. Yet, he couldn't help but feel surprised. The woman Julian had been pining for turned out to be someone like this. He wondered whether it was Julian's taste that was questionable or his own judgment for having chosen him in the first place. Parker asked with a teasing smile, "Do you want to tell your unlucky ex-husband and see his reaction when he finds out the truth?" Summer tossed the phone back to Parker, disinterested. "No. Why should I? Let them reap what they've sown." Meanwhile, in the study of the Liu family, the person Julian had sent to investigate Summer had returned with news. The information they found was the same as 3 years ago. After leaving the Liu family, he had left no trace behind. As the person reported in detail, Julian's gaze grew profound, and he hung up the phone. For the first time, he felt a flicker of curiosity about his ex-wife, whom he had once dismissed without a second thought. Where had he gone? Where else could he possibly be? After a while, for some inexplicable reason, he pulled up Summer's number from his contacts and, as if possessed, dialed it. When the call connected, a mechanical voice greeted him. He had been blocked. Julian froze for a moment, then let out a cold laugh before slamming his phone down on the table. A few hours later, Vivian stepped into the study. Julian was buried in paperwork. Vivian cautiously spoke up, "For years, you've been working this late every day. You should find someone to share the load, or your health will suffer eventually." He responded lightly, "It's fine, you go rest first." Vivian tried again, "I really want to help you." Julian was focused on an urgent contract, his tone unintentionally laced with impatience. "No need." He didn't look up, so he failed to notice the ambition and greed hidden deep in Vivian's eyes. He wasn't born into wealth. Though his parents were intellectuals, the family was far from affluent. Having spent years abroad, Yin Shui had long been immersed in the whirlpool of power and wealth, if not for being unable to sustain his position in the U.S., he would never have chosen to return to his home country. After returning, upon learning that Julian still hadn't moved on, he naturally wouldn't let this opportunity slip. However, compared to Julian's feelings, what he truly coveted was the vast fortune of the Liu family. Although Julian treated her with tenderness, he was exceptionally cautious in company matters. Even if he wanted to meddle in Tianzi Group's affairs, he could never find the right opportunity. Fearing that being too obvious would expose him, at this moment, Julian seemed to realize his attitude had been somewhat cold. He stopped his work and said, "Vivian, your birthday is coming up. I plan to throw you a birthday party. Rest well these days, don't worry about other things." Vivian forced a faint smile. "Thank you." As Julian turned to leave, a flicker of resentment flashed in his eyes. After leaving the study, he began to scheme another plan. Yesterday at the Guanlan Club, he encountered Eric, who had just been ousted from his position as president of Shen Group. Shen Group was the enterprise of Rongqing's wealthiest family. If he could gain control of Shen, power and wealth would be within easy reach. In his eyes, the new female president, Summer, was nothing more than a pampered young lady. While Eric was utterly foolish, this family was far easier to manipulate than Julian. A glint of ruthlessness flashed in Yinsno's eyes as he made his decision. Returning to his room, he dialed Eric's number. "Young master, how about we make a deal?" A few days later, during a meal with Parker, Summer brought up Eric's unusual behavior over the past couple of days. "His always resented grandpa for handing the company to me. Yet this time he actually offered to treat me to dinner as an apology," Summer said while cutting her steak. Parker, recalling Eric's actions over the past 3 years, solemnly warned, "Summer, your cousin's character is truly untrustworthy. You'd better be careful." Summer was well aware of this. Otherwise, Grandpa wouldn't have stripped him of his inheritance rights years ago. The more she thought about tomorrow's dinner, the more uneasy she felt. "Parker, help me find out what Eric has been up to these past few days," Summer said. Worried about his safety, Parker immediately arranged for someone to investigate. The results of the investigation sent a chill down Summer's spine. When Parker saw what Eric had purchased on the surveillance footage, his expression turned grim. "I'll bring that bastard in right now," Parker growled, but Summer stopped him, her eyes just as cold. "Don't rush. Are you thinking of letting him off easy? He was planning to hurt you," Parker argued. Summer shook her head. "I'm not trying to play the saint, it's just that we don't have enough evidence yet. I have to meet him tomorrow as planned. Only then can we really catch him in the act." Parker let out a cold laugh. "My dear cousin has been living too comfortably for too long. It's about time he spent some quality time reflecting in the place he truly belongs." The next day, Summer went alone to the club Eric had booked. He walked into the private room seemingly without any precautions. The room was filled with a strong fragrance and was empty. Eric hadn't arrived yet. In reality, he and Vivian were sitting in the adjacent private room, quietly waiting for events to unfold. Suddenly, a sharp scream shattered the silence. Eric was brimming with excitement. Had it really worked? Vivian rolled her eyes. Of course, he wouldn't personally handle such a troublesome matter. "Go check it out," she said. Eric immediately rushed out and eagerly made a call, instructing his people outside to let the reporters in. However, his assistant replied in a trembling voice, "Young Master Ying, our plan has been exposed." Eric frowned and directly pushed open the door to Summer's private room. "Trash, who discovered you?" His words were abruptly cut off as he saw Summer sitting calmly in the center of the sofa, staring coldly at him, while the burly men he had brought were pinned to the ground by bodyguards, unable to move. His entire body began to tremble, and he stammered, "Why you didn't fall for the trap. With your level of intelligence, you dare try to harm others." Summer sneered. "I thought I treated you well, yet you drugged me to humiliate me and even brought reporters to expose me. Did you really think I'd be so ashamed I'd kill myself and hand Sheng-Yi over to you? How delusional." Seeing his scheme exposed, Eric flashed a vicious glare. "That's right, I wanted to ruin you. Sheng-Yi should have been mine all along." Summer, convinced he was beyond redemption, said coldly, "Since you're so stubborn, reflect on your actions in prison. Immediately, several police officers rushed into the room and handcuffed Eric. Eric finally realized that his actions this time had broken the law and couldn't be resolved with money. He shouted anxiously, "This wasn't my idea. It was Yin Shui. He's in the next room. Go arrest him." Hearing the name, Summer frowned slightly. The police quickly headed to the adjacent room, but Yin Shui, sensing trouble, had already fled. Summer hurriedly pressed against the private room's window and saw a familiar luxury car slowly driving away. It was a car registered under Julian's name, which he recognized at a glance. Eric kept protesting his innocence, but Vivian was far too shrewd. Every scheme had only been discussed in front of Eric, leaving no evidence behind. The drugs and the thugs had all been arranged by Eric himself, and this time, he hadn't even shown up in person. Summer's gaze turned icy as he ignored Eric completely and strode out of the private room. After returning to the Yoon family manor in the evening, Parker had already investigated the matter thoroughly. Eric had indeed met with Vivian twice before purchasing the knockout drug. Summer let out a cold laugh. "I don't have time to bother with her, but I never expected her to dare come to me first." Originally, Summer hadn't planned to retaliate against Vivian. After all, stealing a man who didn't love her wasn't important to her, but she never imagined Vivian would resort to such vicious tactics against her, even setting her sights on Xingyi. If anything happened to her, Eric would become the primary heir to Xingyi. With just a few sweet words from Vivian, wouldn't that massive fortune fall right into their hands? How meticulously calculated. Summer closed her eyes and, after a moment, let out a scornful chuckle. Parker looked at her and asked, "Qianxia, what do you plan to do?" A faint smile curled at the corner of her lips. "I heard Julian is throwing her a birthday party. Such a grand occasion. How could I not make a gesture?" The next day, Julian received a call at his office from the president's office of Shengye Group. The secretary's voice was sweet as she carefully relayed Summer's message word for word. "Mr. Liu, our president would like to know if the cooperation you mentioned earlier is still on the table." Julian was momentarily stunned. This president of Shengye Group had previously been adamant about refusing to work with him. So why the sudden call? Had he changed his mind? He twirled his pen thoughtfully. Why the sudden change of heart? The president said it's better to have one more friend than one more enemy. He admits it was his mistake last time. "And we would be deeply grateful if you agreed to cooperate." Julian narrowed his eyes. "How do I know you're sincere this time? We heard you're hosting a birthday party for your girlfriend soon. To show our sincerity, the president will attend with a generous gift." Hearing this, Julian felt the proposal carried some weight. Shengye Group was indeed an important partner for him, and since they were extending an olive branch, he saw no reason to refuse. "Very well, we'll await your presence." On the day of the birthday banquet, the scene was indeed quite grand. Julian, to give Vivian face, specially reserved the most exclusive Beidao venue in Rongqing. The parking lot on the first floor of the hotel was filled with luxury cars, as if showcasing a high-end auto exhibition. Socialites and young ladies from all walks of life surrounded Vivian, treating her like a princess. Even Vivian's parents, who usually focus on scientific research, were invited to attend. With everyone praising her as a refined lady from a scholarly family, Vivian's vanity was greatly satisfied. Not only did it make up for the disappointment she felt after a recent failed plan, but it also made her feel that even without a prestigious family background, she remained the center of attention. Possessing an enviable, respectable status, a lavish birthday celebration, and Julian's affection. Despite the lively atmosphere, this was not the kind of environment Julian enjoyed, however. For Vivian's sake, he endured it and accompanied him as they mingled among the guests. Linda, dressed in a magnificent gown, chatted happily with the attendees, every word filled with praise for Vivian. "That's right, in a few years, Vivian will be engaged. A girl like her is the only one worthy of my son. As for the ex-wife, don't even mention that country girl. She has nothing. How could she compare to Vivian? Even Vivian's toenails are more refined than her." When Julian passed by, he happened to hear Linda's unapologetic belittling of Summer. He frowned, feeling it was highly inappropriate for his mother to say such things in this setting. Just then, several well-dressed noble women quietly entered the banquet hall and headed straight for Vivian. Suddenly, they lashed out, punching and kicking Vivian, even shoving Julian aside. "You shameless wretch! Did you think we wouldn't find you just because you fled back to the country? A homewrecker like you has the nerve to celebrate a birthday." The entire venue fell silent in an instant. Vivian's hair was pulled into disarray, and her gown was torn. When Julian snapped out of his shock, his face darkened as he reached out to stop them. "What right do you have to cause trouble here?" The noble women showed no fear. "She's the shameless wench who seduced my husband. I'm here to teach her a lesson." Vivian hid behind Julian, frantically defending herself. "It's not like that. Julian, they're lying. I don't even know them." At that moment, the large screen at the front of the venue suddenly went black. Then, one photo after another began to appear, each showing Vivian in a hotel room abroad with various wealthy older men. The photos played on a loop, making everyone in the room gasp in shock. Vivian's highly educated parents nearly fainted on the spot, and Julian's face turned completely dark, his gaze like an icy blade fixed on Vivian. Vivian's face went pale as she desperately tried to explain. "This isn't real. These photos must be photoshopped. Julian, you have to believe me." But a well-dressed woman from one of the wealthy families scoffed. "Photoshopped? I even have videos. Should I play them so everyone can see if they're real or not?" The words made Vivian tremble from head to toe, her lips shaking so much that she couldn't utter another word. The entire hall fell into a suffocating silence. Just then, the loud voice of a greeter rang out at the entrance, breaking the silence. "President Summer Yoon of Shengye Group has arrived." The double doors slowly opened, and a woman in a silver, custom-made gown walked gracefully into the hall. Her features were elegant, and a faint, enigmatic smile played on her lips. Seeing Summer arrive in such dazzling style, Vivian, as if grasping at her last hope, panicked and shouted, "Summer, this is all you're doing. You're the one trying to ruin me." Julian was also stunned when he saw Summer appear. His intuition had indeed been correct. Summer was no ordinary country girl but someone with a prestigious background and profound knowledge. He had never imagined that Summer was actually the young lady of the Shengye Group. Over these 3 years, Summer had been playing another role by his side. Not only him, but even the seemingly innocent Vivian had deceived her. The usually self-assured Julian had been manipulated by 2 women, which filled him with immense anger, his face darkening to the extreme. Summer walked gracefully toward Vivian, each step exuding composure. "Stop spouting nonsense here. What have I done to harm you? Did I force you to seduce someone else's husband?" Summer's calm demeanor and commanding presence instantly left Vivian speechless. But soon Vivian regained her composure. She decided to stubbornly cling to the claim that Summer had framed her. Otherwise, if she admitted it, even Julian wouldn't let her off. She knew all too well that Julian could never tolerate betrayal. "It was you. You were jealous that I took him from you for years, so you deliberately set me up." Summer sneered. "A mere man isn't worth all this effort from me." Upon hearing this, Julian's eyes flickered with an inscrutable change. What do you mean?" Silver Snow's voice trembled, his heart growing increasingly panicked, while Summer's gaze swept over his prey like a hawk's. "Don't you have any idea yourself?" It was clear that Summer already knew about his conspiracy with Eric to frame Vivian. That matter was far more serious than a simple extramarital affair. It was enough to land someone in prison. Thus, Vivian pinned his last hope on Julian. He approached Julian, gripping his arm tightly. "Julian, Summer is framing me. You have to believe me. I love you so much. How could I ever do such a thing?" Yet Julian, ever so astute, had already pieced together most of the truth. He suspected that Eric's recent arrest was Summer's doing, and Silver Snow was undoubtedly involved behind the scenes. Julian pulled his hand away, casting a look of disgust at Vivian. Vivian collapsed weakly to the ground, feeling nothing but icy coldness all around him. It was all over. He had lost everything, his reputation in ruins. And Julian no longer loved him. The birthday banquet, which should have been a joyous celebration, ended in bitter discord. Vivian's scandal quickly climbed to the top of the trending search list, but it was soon suppressed. Summer knew this was Julian's doing. But she didn't stop it, after all. Her purpose had already been achieved. She had taken revenge on Vivian and made Julian taste the bitterness of his own choices, for someone as proud as Julian. Discovering that the woman he deeply loved turned out to be this kind of person, and having it exposed to everyone, was enough to make him feel sick for quite a while. Thinking about it, Summer couldn't help but find it all ironic. In the end, they had brought this on themselves. A cheater and a scumbag are a perfect match. Julian's feelings for Vivian might not have been true love. More likely, it was just an obsession. Otherwise, why would he have hurried to marry someone else as soon as he went abroad? Now, whatever obsession remained had probably faded completely, leaving Julian with nothing but endless regret. Regret that he didn't see Vivian's true colors sooner. With Julian's abilities, it would have been easy for him to uncover what Vivian was really up to abroad, but he never did, either because he trusted her too much, or because he was simply too confident in his own judgment. Eric has already been imprisoned. Summer provided the police with more evidence of his embezzlement and personal enrichment, and it is expected that his sentence will not be light. It is unlikely that we will see him again anytime soon. Summer's aunt and her family frequently came to cause trouble. Since the company's security prevented them from entering, they instead targeted Summer's residence. In the end, Summer decided to move out of his original home and relocate to a standalone villa under his name. After his family could no longer find him, they gradually gave up their harassment. Summer's grandfather had 2 children, his father, Yoon Anting, and his aunt Molly. Yoon Anting passed away in a car accident during Summer's childhood, so he was primarily raised by his grandfather and inherited his grandfather's business acumen. In contrast, Eric grew up spoiled by Molly, becoming a pleasure-seeking playboy, though he harbored no small amount of ambition in his heart. Under Summer's efforts, Shen Group gradually returned to normal operations, regaining its former glory. The shareholders' attitude toward the new CEO shifted from initial skepticism to genuine admiration. Those who had once been loyal to Yoon In-jae were also completely purged from the company by Summer. Summer had just stepped into the office and sat down when he heard a knock on the door. "Come in," he responded. The door opened to reveal his secretary, Miss An. Holding a bouquet of roses so large it nearly obscured her, Angela carefully placed the flowers on the desk and let out a long sigh of relief. "President Yoon, these flowers are for you." Summer examined the bouquet in front of her and found a card nestled among the flowers. It read, "Pleasure working with you," in a clearly printed font, indicating the florist had sent it on someone's behalf. "Who sent these flowers?" Summer asked. "The front desk received them and said they were for you. So I brought them up. I don't know who specifically sent them," Angela replied. Not long after, the mystery was solved when the president of Tianza Group, Julian, paid a personal visit. As the president of Shen Group, Summer naturally had to receive this unexpected guest. Julian sat in the meeting room, leisurely sipping coffee as he waited for Summer to arrive. Soon, the door opened, and Summer walked in wearing a black tailored dress and high heels. Her makeup was flawless, and her hair was pulled back into a sleek low ponytail, exuding professionalism and efficiency. Faced with this version of Summer, Julian felt both familiar and unfamiliar. In the past, he had merely seen Summer as a tool for revenge against Vivian, never truly paying attention to her. Now, he realized Summer was not only beautiful but also carried an undeniable presence. "President Liu, to what do we owe the honor of your visit today?" Summer asked politely with a smile. Seeing Summer's distant demeanor, Julian felt a twinge of discomfort, as if something that once belonged to him was gradually slipping away. Despite his inner unease, he maintained a calm exterior. President Yoon must have a short memory for important matters. "The cooperation mentioned earlier was never brought up again after disrupting my banquet." The so-called cooperation back then was merely Summer's excuse to attend Vivian's birthday party. He never expected Julian to take it seriously. At this moment, Summer wasn't sure whether to call him naive or simply innocent. The matter of collaboration was not only Summer's excuse but also Julian's pretext. Perhaps due to some indescribable emotion deep within, he longed to see Summer. Recently, his sleep quality had been poor, and Summer's figure frequently occupied his thoughts, lingering relentlessly. After all, The two had spent 3 years together, even if their initial union wasn't born of pure love. Over time, they had indeed built a certain emotional foundation. Summer's sudden departure left Julian with an unprecedented sense of emptiness. This was the first time he had experienced such a feeling. 3 years ago, Silver Snow's departure abroad had only made him angry, but now Summer's absence left a void in his heart. Even he couldn't articulate what this emotion was. Summer coughed lightly a few times and spoke, regarding the matter of cooperation. Shen has not yet identified specific collaborative projects, but the company remains open to partnerships. If an opportunity arises, I will personally seek advice from President Liu. Faced with Summer's somewhat evasive attitude, Julian was not angered but rather found his reaction quite amusing. He exchanged a glance with Lucas beside him, whereupon Lucas retrieved a document from his briefcase and placed it on the table between them. I've brought President Yoon a highly promising project. Would you be interested in exploring it further? Summer opened the file and saw that it was a land development project in the western part of the city with significant potential. The land had just been released by the government, and the surrounding area was slated for new schools, hospitals, and other public facilities. In the future, this area was expected to become a burgeoning economic hotspot, with many developers eyeing the plot. To his surprise, it had fallen into Julian's hands. Such a high-quality project. Why would President Liu be willing to invite me to participate? Summer asked bluntly. Given the Tianzi Group's capabilities, they could easily acquire and develop this land independently. He found it hard to believe that Julian would so generously share the benefits, especially since their relationship was far from close. It was difficult to imagine him considering cooperation out of goodwill. Therefore, Julian's initiative to contact him this time must have an ulterior motive. Julian lowered his head slightly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips, then raised his eyes to meet Summer's gaze. Given our history, isn't it only natural for us to collaborate when a good opportunity arises? There's nothing particularly special between us. Summer's response carried a hint of barely noticeable tension, as the two had previously maintained a surface-level politeness. Now that Julian had brought the topic into the open, it made Summer feel somewhat uneasy. Moreover, Julian's gaze seemed to have grown more complex, stirring a sense of unease in his heart. Sensing Summer's discomfort, Julian skillfully shifted the conversation. I'm sure President Yoon is well aware that this piece of land has attracted considerable attention. Now that it's in my hands, it's only natural that some would be displeased. Therefore, I believe if Sheng Yi and Tianzi collaborate on developing this land, no one would have any objections. Summer pondered for a moment and found Julian's suggestion reasonable. In business, being the center of attention, while not posing a real threat, was indeed bothersome. Thus, finding a partner for joint development was a wise move, and Sheng Yi Group was undoubtedly the best choice. Within Rong City, no partner was more suitable than Sheng Yi. Since Summer took office, he had swiftly resolved internal and external company issues, earning widespread acclaim in the business world. The future appreciation potential of this land was enormous. Whether for residential or commercial development, it promised significant profit opportunities. Business relationships have always prioritized mutual benefit, and Summer believed personal grudges shouldn't lead to missing out on Sheng Yi's lucrative opportunity. In the end, he agreed to Julian's proposal for collaboration. In the most bustling bar of Rong City at night, Parker sat at the center of the VIP booth, surrounded by several beautiful women. Shortly after, a woman in a black strapless dress walked in, her high heels clicking against the floor. Parker immediately dismissed the women around him and stood up to greet the new guest. "Miss, you finally arrived. We've been waiting for you for so long," Parker said. The woman was none other than Summer, who had rushed over after work. Quickly changing her outfit, "Yeah, long time no see. I'm late, so I deserve a penalty drink." "Definitely a penalty drink," she replied. The crowd chimed in agreement. Those who joined in the teasing were all Summer's childhood friends or classmates, hailing from wealthy families and bound by intricate connections. Tonight's gathering was organized by Parker, and among those present, only Parker shared the closest relationship with Summer. The others maintained superficial friendships based on various interests. Facing her friend's playful banter, Summer cheerfully downed 3 penalty drinks. Parker, aware of her drinking capacity, didn't intervene. No one in the room could outdrink her. At the same time, Julian was also at the bar with friends. "I mean, for the sake of one woman, do you really have to keep such a long face?" The speaker was Ethan, Julian's childhood friend, ever since the blood-drinking incident. Julian had been in a foul mood, rarely attending social gatherings. Ethan had hoped this outing would lighten his spirits, but Julian remained expressionless. The girls could only watch him from afar, too intimidated to approach. His usual charm with women seemed to have vanished. When Summer walked into the bar, Julian immediately noticed him, and from that moment on, his gaze was fixed on him. Seeing him drink and chat cheerfully with other men, Julian couldn't help but clench his teeth. Especially when Pei Yang's hand rested on Summer's shoulder, Julian downed his drink in one gulp and slammed the glass heavily on the table. Ethan was startled and asked, "Julian, what are you doing?" But Julian didn't answer, his eyes still locked on Summer. Jiang Yian followed his gaze and recognized the familiar figure. "Summer from Shengye Group," he asked curiously. "You're not actually interested in her, are you?" Jiang Yian had no idea about Julian and Summer's past marriage. A little-known union that had neither a wedding ceremony nor formal celebrations. Thus, Jiang Yian only knew Julian had a wife with the surname Yun but had never met her, making it impossible for him to connect Summer with that seemingly unremarkable wife. "That's President Yun of Shengye, right? Why are you staring at her?" Ethan pressed further. "Could it be you're interested in her?" Before the words even settled, Summer stood up and left the booth. Julian also rose and headed in Summer's direction. "Hey, where are you going?" Ethan called after Julian's retreating figure, only to be met with silence. Jiang Yian thought to himself that such a reaction was understandable after a breakup and didn't press further. Summer went to the restroom and dry-heaved by the sink. Strangely, despite usually having a high alcohol tolerance, he felt unwell today. Perhaps it was due to recent exhaustion. So he decided to schedule a hospital checkup when he had the time. Summer had just stepped out of the restroom when she spotted Julian waiting by the door, seemingly for her. Though they were already divorced, they now shared an additional layer of partnership, so Summer couldn't simply ignore him. She walked over with a faint smile. "What a coincidence, President Liu. I didn't expect to run into you here, right outside the women's restroom, no less. Quite the coincidence, isn't it?" "Not a coincidence, I was waiting for you," Julian replied solemnly. Summer wasn't sure if he was genuinely oblivious or just pretending, but he answered her seriously, completely missing her sarcasm. How infuriating. But she had to keep smiling. "What brings you here, President Liu?" "I had no idea my former wife, who I lived with day and night, had such a high alcohol tolerance." Summer added, "We're already divorced, aren't we?" Julian gave a slight smile and adjusted his tie. "I recall we signed the divorce agreement, but we never finalized it at the Civil Affairs Office. Since returning to the Yun family, Summer had been preoccupied with company matters and had completely forgotten about this step. Without completing the formalities, they weren't officially divorced. "Then let's schedule a time to get it done," Summer said calmly. Julian watched as Summer remained calm and composed, but it felt like a heavy stone was pressing on his chest, making it hard to breathe. Step by step, he moved closer to Summer, backing him against the wall. Summer instinctively shrank back, his eyes filled with wariness as he looked at Julian. "What do you want?" Julian raised his hand and pressed it against the wall, trapping Summer in his embrace. "What do I want? I should be asking why you lied to me for years." His warm breath brushed against Summer's face, leaving him flustered. Years ago, at a banquet, Julian had fallen in love at first sight and had someone investigate his background. But at the time, Julian already had a girlfriend, Vivian Summer, so he couldn't bring himself to interfere in their relationship. Thus, he buried his feelings for Julian deep in his heart. It wasn't until later when Vivian went abroad, Summer, that the small flame in her heart for Liu reignited once again. But she then learned that Julian wanted to marry a wife with no background, so she defied her family's objections, concealed her identity, and married Julian. In truth, Summer also knew that Julian was only doing this out of spite toward Vivian. The reason he wanted a woman with no status or background was simply because she would be easier to control. When no longer needed, she could be easily dismissed with money. Summer naively believed that as long as she stayed by Julian's side, she would eventually move him, and Julian would fall in love with her. During those 3 years in the Liu family, she worked like a horse, enduring hardships without complaint, yet Julia never spared her a second glance. She suffered every kind of hardship she had never experienced before in her life while living with the Liu family. But in the end, things still didn't go as she hoped. As soon as Vivian returned to the country, Julian asked her for a divorce. Over these 3 years, he couldn't even get close to the periphery of Julian's life, let alone enter his heart. The reason Summer failed to achieve his wish was that he neglected the principle of loving oneself before loving others. In his pursuit of loving Julian, he lost himself. He stopped loving himself. So how could Julian love him in return? Now, he no longer wants any emotional entanglement with Julian. His heart is completely closed to Julian. In the time ahead, he only wants to focus on being himself and loving himself well. He wishes to spend time with family and friends, and to diligently manage Shengyi Group. Faced with Julian's questioning, Summer had nothing to explain. She hid her identity only to marry Julian. Apart from this, she was wholeheartedly devoted to him. But now none of that mattered anymore. Seeing Summer remain silent, Julian pressed further. "Why aren't you saying anything?" Summer let out a cold laugh. "What's the point of saying all this now, Mr. Liu? You never loved me, and I don't love you anymore either. Hurrying to finalize the divorce is the best for both of us, isn't it? I don't love you anymore." These few words left Julian momentarily stunned. Although he had never had any feelings for Summer, he could tell that Summer loved him deeply. Even the household staff thought Summer was madly in love with Julian. In fact, right before marrying Summer, he had assumed she was only after the family's wealth, but later, he realized that wasn't the case. She seemed to genuinely like him. However, he could never love a woman with no family background, no connections, and no education, so he had always turned a blind eye to Summer's love. In truth, he had no idea Summer's feelings for him came about. As they had only met once before getting married, he had approached her on his own initiative, saying she met his criteria for marriage and wanted to marry him. Seeing that he was decent-looking and gentle in temperament, she agreed. But how could his love come so inexplicably and leave without giving her time to react, taking advantage of the moment when Liu was dazed? Summer stomped hard on Julian's foot with her high heel and quickly ran off. After returning to the booth, he still felt somewhat uncomfortable and had Parker take him home. After returning home, Summer drank a bowl of hangover soup made by the housekeeper, took a shower, and immediately fell asleep. For some reason, she had been feeling unusually tired lately and had little appetite. Summer couldn't figure out the reason, so she decided not to dwell on it. Perhaps she was just exhausted. She fell asleep shortly after getting into bed. Meanwhile, Julian on the other side didn't have such good sleep quality. He tossed and turned in bed, unable to fall asleep. Summer's image lingered in his mind, so he gave up on sleep altogether, got up, took another bottle of wine from the cabinet, and sat by the window, sipping slowly. He raised his eyes to the stars in the sky, wondering if Summer was asleep by now. In her dreams, Summer turned over, as if sensing someone thinking of her. Julian stayed awake all night, meticulously retracing every moment from his first encounter with Summer up to the present. He had assumed his memories would be hazy. Yet every shared experience, big and small, played like a film reel in his mind, each detail vividly preserved. He had just brought Summer back to the Liu family home, their first night together, the first time Summer tied his tie, the first time she cared for him when he was drunk, the first meal she cooked for him. So many moments, unbeknownst to him, Summer had gradually woven herself into the fabric of his daily life and carved a place in his heart. Only now did he realize why he felt such emptiness after Summer left. It was because Summer had quietly claimed a part of his heart long ago. Losing that piece naturally left him hollow and unsettled. That's why he couldn't, absolutely couldn't, divorce Summer. He began to feel grateful that they hadn't finalized the divorce paperwork before Summer left, granting them this second chance. Early the next morning, Julian eagerly went to Summer's office. Intending to tell her that he had feelings for her and didn't want to divorce. However, he learned that Summer hadn't come to work that day. As he walked out of the Shunyi group building, he thought of calling Summer, but when he opened his phone, he realized he didn't have her contact information, so he had someone call Summer's secretary, asking them to tell her to call him when she had time, as he had something important to discuss at a private hospital in Rongcheng. Summer wasn't at work today but had come for a checkup. She suspected that her recent busy schedule and irregular eating habits might have caused her nausea. Sitting across from the doctor with the test results in hand, Summer was stunned when the doctor told her she wasn't sick. She was pregnant. In that moment, it felt like a bolt from the blue. During Julian's 3 years of marriage, he had once fantasized about having a child of his own with Julian. His mother-in-law, Linda, would often bring up the issue of not having children, generally speaking. It was fine that he came from the countryside, but she would secretly call him a hen that couldn't lay eggs. Linda didn't know that every time he and Julian were together, Julian would take protective measures and even ask him to take medication afterward. With such double protection, how could he possibly get pregnant? He had once hinted to Julian that he wanted a child, but each time, Julian coldly brushed it off, saying it wasn't the right time. As time passed, he stopped bringing it up, but now, how could she be pregnant? According to the doctor, she was already over 3 months pregnant. However, because she was thin and didn't show much, it wasn't noticeable on the surface. She was also quite careless and didn't keep track of her menstrual cycle, as her periods had always been irregular, so there was no need to be cautious. It wasn't uncommon for her to skip a month or two. Little did she know, the reason she hadn't had her period was because she was pregnant. Recalling the events that had happened earlier, Summer remembered when she had gotten pregnant. It was 3 months ago, when she was still married to Julian. One night, Julian came home drunk after a business dinner, and they ended up sleeping together. It must have been that time when Julian didn't use protection. Early the next morning, because her mother-in-law Linda wanted chicken soup, he got up early and forgot to take the morning after pill. Just this one accident. And now there was a little life growing inside her. She couldn't help but marvel at the wonder and greatness of life. In the past, she would have been overjoyed at the arrival of this child. But now, the timing couldn't be worse. On her way home, Summer touched her flat stomach. Hardly able to believe there was a baby over 3 months old inside, the doctor said the baby was already over 3 months along and advised against terminating the pregnancy unless absolutely necessary. Moreover, Summer's health wasn't in the best condition due to years of taking birth control pills. If she terminated this pregnancy, it might be very difficult for her to conceive again. This left Summer deeply troubled, unsure of what to do. The truth was, she had always wanted to be a mother. She dreamed of it. But this child was hers and Julian's. Could a child with parents who didn't love each other grow up happy? If she raised the child alone, without a father, would the child be happy? Her own childhood had been spent without a father. Though her mother and grandfather doted on her, seeing other children with their fathers had left her with an indescribable ache. Did she want her child to relive her own painful past? Summer did not return to her own detached villa, but went back to the Yoon family home. Grace could tell at a glance that Summer was in a bad mood. She knew her daughter best. Whenever Summer sat there silently lost in thought, it meant she was facing something extremely difficult. She personally made a cup of milk for Summer, then sat beside her with the milk. "What's wrong, Xia? You must tell Mom everything. Let's figure it out together." As she spoke, Grace handed the milk to Summer. Back then, Summer ran away from home against her mother's wishes, hid her identity, and married Julian. Now that she's back home, she's pregnant with Julian's child, and she truly doesn't know how to bring it up. "Mom, I'm fine. Just been too busy lately and a bit tired." Hearing Summer say this, Grace finally let go of the worry in her heart. "As long as you're okay, you should delegate company tasks to others when you can. Don't take everything on yourself. Make sure to rest." Summer smiled gently. "I know, Mom, don't worry." Grace placed her hand over Summer's and gave a loving smile. Summer studied Grace and noticed a few strands of white hair at her temples. After the passing of her father, Grace devoted herself to raising Summer. Some advised her to remarry, but she refused every time. Fearing her daughter might feel neglected, she didn't want her to lose her mother after losing her father, so she chose to remain alone for the rest of her life to protect the daughter she loved dearly. Thinking of this, Summer felt overwhelming guilt. Her mother had sacrificed so much, yet she hadn't been an obedient daughter for the past few days due to matters concerning her child. Summer has been absent-minded, even spacing out frequently at work. The knocking at the door had sounded several times, but Summer in the office still didn't respond. Finally, Angela, worried that something might have happened to Summer, pushed the door open and walked in. At that moment, Summer was staring blankly out the window. President Angela softly called Summer's name, and only then did Summer snap out of it, quickly composing herself and returning to her usual demeanor. "Is there something you need, Mr. Lu from Tienza? Julian is here. What does he want?" Since the two companies are now in a partnership, he couldn't very well turn Julian away. Julian waited in the reception room for a while before Summer leisurely pushed the door open and entered. "Mr. Lu, my apologies for being late due to work matters." Summer did it on purpose, wanting to make a point. She meant to tell him that the president of Shengye wasn't someone he could see whenever he pleased. He needed an appointment. Julian, having been in the business world for so many years, naturally understood Summer's message. The Tienza Group was founded single-handedly by Julian's grandfather, but his father was never cut out for business. At one point, the Lu family nearly got kicked out by the board of directors. It was only thanks to Julian, who returned from studying abroad and turned things around, that the Lu family managed to keep their place. In just a few years, Julian completely took control of Tienza, holding 100% of the decision-making power. With his extraordinary abilities, he managed to multiply Tienza's market value several times over in just a few years. In Rongqing, no one else dared to keep Julian waiting the way Summer did. The Yun family had always been the richest in Rongqing, generation after generation making their mark in business. Old Master Yun later founded Shengye, taking the family's wealth and influence to another level. However, in recent years, since Summer had been away, Shengye was left to her older sister Yun Ying, and the company had lost a bit of ground. Still, the Yun family's long history meant they remained the wealthiest in Rongqing. When it came to strength and financial power, Shengye and Tienza were on equal footing, so Summer had every right to treat Julian the way she did. She had the standing for it. "Mr. Lu, what brings you here today?" Summer didn't want to waste words with Julian and got straight to the point. Julian took out a document, flashed it in front of Summer, then tore it to pieces right before Summer's eyes. Summer stared at him in shock, momentarily speechless. The document he had torn was their divorce agreement. Summer had planned to settle the divorce with Julian once she had calmed down, but his current actions left her baffled. He was the one who had proposed the divorce. What did this mean now? Seeing Summer's stunned expression, Julian smiled faintly. "I don't want a divorce, I like you, sign it." Faced with the sudden confession, Summer was full of question marks, wondering if Julian had a fever and if it had fried his brain. Not only did he think this, but he also decided to verify it himself. Summer stepped forward and placed his hand on Julian's forehead. The temperature was normal, so why was he talking nonsense? Just as Summer was about to withdraw his hand, Julian wrapped his arms around her slender waist. What was he doing? After learning she was pregnant, Summer became more sensitive. Now that Julian was so close to her, she felt repelled by Julian's personality. If he found out she was pregnant, he would definitely not let her off easily. It wasn't that she was afraid of him, but she simply didn't want to get entangled with him any further. She pressed her hand against Julian's chest to prevent him from coming any closer. Julian carefully examined Summer's face, feeling his heart pounding wildly, a sensation he had never experienced before. This woman before him seemed to effortlessly accelerate his heartbeat. Under Julian's intense gaze, Summer pushed him away abruptly, saying, "I just wanted to check if you had a fever." Talking nonsense like this, Summer didn't believe his confession, and Julian had anticipated this. Yet, he was determined to speak his mind, and later, he would prove his sincerity through actions. "Summer, I know this might be sudden, but please give me a chance. I'll show you that every word I say comes from the heart." Summer's gaze swept over Julian from head to toe, His appearance was earnest, and his eyes were deep with emotion. But this couldn't move Summer. Before signing the divorce papers, Julian would eagerly come running at the slightest beckon. But now, no matter how devoted Julian appeared, Summer felt no interest. The idea that Julian liked him seemed laughable. It felt like a mockery of the past 3 years of toiling without earning even a shred of his favor. And now that Summer had let go, Julian's sudden affection made him think Julian was sick in the head. With a hollow smile, Summer curled his lips. "President Liu, if you're sick, you should get it treated." After saying that, he turned and left, then loudly addressed Angela at the door. "Xiaowen, see the guest out." Then Angela walked in and gestured for Julian to leave. Julian's face immediately darkened. It wasn't because Summer was kicking him out, but because Summer actually thought he had a problem for saying he liked her. After sending off the fuming Lu Jinjinyan, Angela couldn't help but shiver. Who wouldn't be intimidated by Julian, let alone a scowling Julian? It was terrifying. After that day, Julian started pursuing Summer relentlessly. Every day at work, Summer was greeted with a bouquet of roses. After work, Julian would always wait downstairs at Shen Group's building. He had no idea how Julian got his phone number, but he would send him caring messages every day. Whenever he blocked one number, Julian would simply use a new one. Eventually, Summer stopped bothering to block him and just ignored the messages. After work, he would avoid Julian at all costs. Whenever Julian tried to approach him under the pretext of work, he would delegate the tasks to his subordinates. During this time, Summer was busy handling the company's transition. He had hired a professional manager and planned to temporarily entrust the company to them. After such a long period of careful consideration, Summer decided to keep the baby because if she aborted it this time, she might never be able to become a mother again. However, all she wanted was the child, not Julian, the father, so she didn't plan to tell Julian about the child. She wanted to divorce Julian as soon as possible, then go abroad alone to give birth and return quietly afterward. With the baby growing inside her day by day, she couldn't delay any longer. She had to divorce Julian quickly, but judging by Julian's current attitude, he probably wouldn't agree to the divorce. So Summer came up with a plan. It was quite unexpected that Summer would invite this young lady today. She had been extremely busy lately, and despite his multiple attempts, he hadn't been able to meet her. They chose a cafe downstairs from the Shenya group for their meeting. When Summer arrived, she was already waiting for him. He glanced at the juice in front of Summer, feeling puzzled. "Don't you usually only drink Americanos? Changed your taste?" "I'm pregnant." Parker was utterly shocked, while Summer remained completely calm, as if she were just mentioning something trivial like not wanting to eat rice tonight but noodles instead. The exclamation about the pregnancy drew attention from those nearby. Summer shot him a disdainful glance. "Don't make a fuss here." Parker's handsome brows furrowed slightly. Was he really the one making a fuss? Clearly, it was Summer who was being too calm. Later, Summer directly proposed that Parker act in a play with him. The two would pretend to be a couple to deceive the public for a few years before divorcing. "You plan to raise the child alone?" Parker asked. Summer nodded. As childhood friends who grew up together, Parker was naturally willing to help Summer with this favor. He didn't say things like how hard it would be for a woman to raise a child alone. He knew Summer's decision must have been carefully considered. Besides, Summer wasn't truly alone. He had him. Parker would cherish Summer's child as his own. In truth, Parker had always only loved Summer, but he never voiced it. He knew Summer simply saw him as a good friend. If he crossed that line, they might not even remain friends, an outcome he didn't want. So, he chose to stay silent. Summer held a glass of juice in one hand while the other rested on his still flat stomach, his eyes filled with determination. "Baby, I'll definitely give you a happy life and ensure you grow up healthy and joyful." Then, an inexplicable emotion flickered in his heart, one even he failed to grasp. After work that day, Summer didn't avoid Julian. Instead, she walked arm in arm with Parker, calmly exiting the gates of Shenya Group. Seeing this, Julian immediately rushed forward and pulled the two apart. "Summer, what are you doing?" Julian demanded angrily. In contrast to Julian's agitation, Summer remained exceptionally calm. "Is there a problem with me walking arm in arm with my boyfriend?" The woman's cold, distant voice felt like a knife stabbing into Julian's chest. Boyfriend. Julian's gaze swept fiercely toward Parker, who met his eyes unflinchingly. Seeing Julian's obsessive and stubborn glare, Parker realized that for Summer to shake him off might not be such a simple matter. Summer once again grabbed Parker's hand. He coldly glanced at Julian, his expression icy, and then said to his boyfriend without hesitation, "I'll have my lawyer bring you the divorce papers. I don't want anything. Please sign them as soon as possible, and then we'll finalize the divorce. If you refuse, I'll file for divorce in court, and we'll proceed legally." Summer didn't want to go through legal proceedings because it would take too long. He was about to start showing his pregnancy and had no time to waste with Julian. If Julian found out about the pregnancy, the divorce would become even more impossible. He said this deliberately to provoke Julian. Someone as proud as Julian would never tolerate such a challenge. Clearly, Summer's goal was achieved. Julian's face openly displayed his fury. "Summer, I'll ask you one last time. Are you absolutely determined to divorce me?" "Yes, I don't love you anymore. The person I love now is Parker." Hearing this, his expression darkened instantly, as if covered in frost, his brows furrowed tightly, his face grave and stern, radiating an intimidating severity. "Fine, I'll grant your wish. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., meet me at the Civil Affairs office." With that said, Julian drove off in his car, and Summer's anxious heart finally settled. He had stayed by Julian's side, taking meticulous care of him for 3 years, thoroughly understanding his temperament and nature. Except for matters of the heart, he knew Julian inside out. Naturally aware of how to ignite the fury in Julian's heart, Julian was domineering, strong-willed, and highly capable. Having been adored since childhood, his possessiveness was intense. What was his had to be entirely his. The moment it bore any stain, he would discard it without hesitation. The same went for women. Julian would never tolerate his woman harboring feelings for another man, nor would he ever consider winning her over. It wasn't that he feared failure, but rather that he believed she was no longer pure and thus unworthy of him. The next day, Pei-young thought about accompanying Summer, but Summer refused. She just wanted to resolve things with Julian and get divorced as quickly as possible. After provoking him so intensely the day before, it was almost enough. If she brought Pei-young along today, it might make Julian think she was eager to be with another man. And he might deliberately drag out the process. An outcome she didn't want, so she chose to go alone. Today, Summer wore delicate makeup and a black tailored dress with an A-line silhouette, which perfectly concealed her slightly protruding belly. Summer arrived early at the Civil Affairs office. The agreed-upon time was approaching, but Julian still hadn't shown up. Julian was usually the type to arrive 10 minutes early, yet now he was running late. Summer began to wonder if he had changed his mind, but she didn't dare call to hurry him. If his privileged temper flared up and he ignored her, she wouldn't know what to do. So, she waited and waited until finally, at 3 o'clock, Julian arrived belatedly. Julian was dressed in a sharp suit. His hair meticulously styled, but faint dark circles under his eyes were hard to miss. Summer gave him only a brief glance and said nothing. Julian's state was none of her concern. She just wanted to finalize the divorce as quickly as possible. The two of them walked in without exchanging a single word. The doctor walked into the Civil Affairs Bureau to complete the divorce procedures. There weren't many people there to handle paperwork today, so the two of them finished quickly. It was so fast that Summer felt a bit surprised. He hadn't expected it to go so smoothly. The moment the divorce certificate was in hand, a faint smile appeared in Summer's eyes. "Baby, Mom did it. Just like that. I'm happy." A deep, magnetic voice beside him pulled Summer out of his joyful mood. "Of course, I'm happy." Summer shot Julian a glare and then quickly walked toward the car, watching Summer's retreating figure. A pang of bitterness welled up in Julian's heart. After leaving the entrance of Shengye Group yesterday, Julian went out drinking. He had always had a high alcohol tolerance, but for the first time in years. He got drunk last night and didn't wake up until noon today. Only then did he remember that he had an appointment with Summer to finalize the divorce, so he leisurely got himself ready. He had assumed that, after being over an hour late, Summer would have already left in anger. To his surprise, Summer was still sitting there obediently waiting for him, without a single word of complaint. Was he really that eager to divorce him? Fine, let's get divorced. Julian sat in the car but hesitated to start the engine. He glanced at the divorce certificate he had carelessly tossed onto the passenger seat, then slammed his hand heavily on the steering wheel. At that moment, a man and a woman walked out of the civil affairs office. The woman held a marriage certificate with a beaming smile, while the man's expression remained calm. The scene felt all too familiar to Julian. Years ago, he and Summer had been just like that couple. She had carefully unfolded the marriage certificate in front of him, but he hadn't even glanced at it before hastily walking away, leaving her standing alone at the entrance, visibly hurt by his indifference. Yet, the sadness on her face lasted only a moment before she forced a smile and hurried after him. Witnessing this, Julian immediately pulled out his phone and called Lucas. Find out where Summer is right now. Lucas worked efficiently, and soon sent Summer's current address to Julian. Is it the hospital? What is he doing there? At this moment, a melodramatic soap opera was playing in Julian's mind. Could it be that Summer insisted on divorcing him because she had some terminal illness? Meanwhile, Summer, who was undergoing a prenatal checkup, sneezed several times in a row. Are you okay? Parker asked with concern. Summer shook her head. I'm fine. Probably just caught a cold from the weather turning colder. Julian's car sped swiftly, and he soon arrived at the hospital entrance. He ran up and down searching for Summer, finally spotting her and Parker at the entrance of the obstetrics department. The doctor handed the pregnancy test results to Summer. The baby is very healthy. Remember to come for regular checkups in the future. Parker took the results on behalf of Summer. Thank you, doctor. The father is very handsome, and the mother is beautiful too. The baby is sure to be lovely, the doctor joked with a smile. Julian's face flashed through Summer's mind. Such a handsome face, the genes couldn't be bad. Still, she hoped the baby would take after her more. The doctor mistook Parker for the father, but neither of them corrected him, simply smiling and thanking the doctor. Parker didn't correct the misunderstanding because he rather enjoyed the feeling of being mistaken for the father. Summer didn't correct it either, seeing no need since she would be flying to France next week. On the other side of the hallway, Julian stood with his back pressed tightly against the wall, as if frozen in place, unable to move. It felt as though thousands of ants were crawling and gnawing at his heart, a pain he couldn't quite describe. So this was why Summer had been in such a hurry to divorce him. She was pregnant. Julian didn't know how he left the hospital. Every step felt unbearably heavy, as if a massive boulder were crushing his body. When Ethan arrived at the bar, Julian had already drunk a table full of alcohol. This bar was Ethan's private property, and Julianne was a regular here, so the staff knew him. Seeing Julian drink so much, they worried something might happen and called Ethan. After Ethan entered the private room, Julian just glanced at him indifferently before continuing to drink. It was strange. Why couldn't he get drunk no matter how much he drank today? The scene at the hospital lingered relentlessly in Julian's mind. He tried to force himself to forget, to stop thinking about it, but his mind no longer obeyed him. The more he tried not to think, the clearer the image became. Seeing his good friend so troubled by love, Jiang Yian was also deeply distressed. He had only found out yesterday that the young lady of the Shengyi group was actually the countrywoman who had been married to Julian for 3 years. Moreover, it was she who insisted on divorcing Julian, but Julian refused. Previously, when Julian dragged him out to drown his sorrows in alcohol, he thought it was because of Vivian, but it turned out to be because of Summer. He had never seen Julian repeatedly resort to drinking to ease his sorrows over a woman like this. But drowning sorrows in alcohol only makes them deeper. It clearly doesn't have the power to dispel them. He patted Julian on the shoulder, his voice heavy. Julian didn't speak, only giving a slight nod. Ethan took a glass for himself and sat down beside Julian. He picked up the bottle from the table and poured himself a drink. Come on, brother, I'll have one with you. Julian ignored his toast and continued drinking alone. Are you serious? It's just a woman, isn't it? If you want, plenty of women would flock to you, Jiang Yian said. Chen Jinyan remained silent for a while, not saying a word, simply downing the drink in his glass in one go. She's pregnant. Chen Jingyan's words left Ethan utterly confused. What kind of thunderstruck deed did you pull off to make Summer pregnant and still insist on divorcing you? After saying this, did he really mean it? Realizing he had misspoken, he quickly covered his mouth for a few years. His slightly pursed thin lips exuded a cold aura, his expression calm and unreadable. The child isn't mine. Every time he was with Summer, they took double protective measures, making it impossible for Summer to get pregnant. Damn, Ethan exclaimed in surprise. The heiress of the Shen group is something else. Daring to cuckold Julian. Hey, don't take it too hard. Life for men can be like this sometimes. Ethan really didn't know how to comfort Julian, so he picked up his glass and forcefully clinked it with Julian's. Today, I'll risk my life to keep you company. Let's drink. Before long, Ethan began to lose consciousness, watching Ethan slump over the table. Julian shook his head, a hint of helplessness in his expression. After lying on the table for a while, Ethan suddenly lifted his head again, his gaze fixed intently on Julian. He asked the question he had wanted to ask when he was still sober. How do you know the child isn't yours? It was hard for Ethan to imagine that Summer, married to someone like Julian, could still be interested in another man, though reluctant to admit it. Ethan had to acknowledge that Julian's looks were truly top tier among men. I took thorough precautions. She couldn't have gotten pregnant. At the time, Julian had never considered having a child with Summer, but now he found himself wondering, if they had shared a child, would the outcome have been different? Even with precautions, pregnancy isn't impossible. There's always a chance of accidents. I think you should get to the bottom of this. Ethan was drunk, but his words carried more weight than when he was sober. His words instantly enlightened Julian, who suddenly stood up, patted Ethan on the shoulder, and said, "Thanks, bro." With that, Julian left without even grabbing his coat. Not looking back, Ethan glanced at Chen Jingyan's hurried footsteps, then at the lonely coat abandoned on the sofa. Before slumping back down, Julian went straight to the hospital where Summer was getting her prenatal checkup. He never expected that. Just as Jiang Yian had said, the child Summer was carrying was his. He found out that Summer was already over 3 months pregnant, and 3 months ago, Summer hadn't yet left the Liu family. What Summer did after leaving the Liu family, Julian couldn't guarantee, but before that, he was certain Summer wouldn't do anything outrageous. After learning this, Julian's previous gloom vanished, replaced by endless joy. He had just been thinking about having a child of their own with Summer. And now that dream had come true, but in the blink of an eye, he began to worry again. Summer was pregnant yet still insisted on divorcing him. She must be resolute. Did she really despise him so much in her heart, so much that she wouldn't even tell him about carrying his child, choosing instead to secretly give birth alone? Then he thought about how unbearable it would be to imagine her child calling another man dad. He would never allow such a thing to happen. The next day, Summer was about to leave for the company when he saw Julian's car parked right outside his house. Julian was leaning against the car, and there were a few scattered cigarette butts on the ground. "What are you doing here?" Hearing Summer's voice, Julian slowly raised his head to look at him. Julian had arrived here late last night. He had intended to knock on the door and confront Summer to clear things up, but then he thought Summer was probably asleep and didn't want to disturb his rest. So he ended up waiting there all night. Seeing the exhaustion on Julian's usually handsome face and the faint shadow of stubble along his sharp jawline, Chihaya could tell he had stayed up all night waiting for her. What does he want? Could he have regretted it after signing the divorce papers? But now that the divorce is finalized, even if he regrets it, it's too late. Let's talk inside. Summer and Julian went to a nearby dim sum restaurant together. Yesterday, Julian stood outside Summer's house all night without sleep, thinking about many things. At first, he couldn't understand why Summer was so determined to divorce him, not even telling him about the child. As a father, he later put himself in Summer's shoes and suddenly understood. After learning Summer's true identity, he had someone investigate her. Summer had married him under a hidden identity back then. During the 3 years of their marriage, Summer worked tirelessly in Lujiazhu, enduring hardships without complaint, but all she received was a divorce agreement from him after Vivian returned. Julian didn't know when Summer fell in love with him so deeply that she was willing to abandon herself for him. But Julian knew that if he were to call her Summer, he could never do what she did, lower himself to accommodate someone he loved. Even when that person's heart belonged to another, yet, if that person was Summer, he would be willing to try. He loved her and owed her. Is there really no chance for us to start over? Julian pleaded. Summer shook her head firmly. No. Hearing this, Julian lowered his head, pressing his hands to his forehead. Seeing him like this, Summer felt a sense of unease. What had suddenly come over Julian? Just yesterday, during their divorce, he had been filled with anger. Why was he now overcome with regret? Yes, regret. Did he know something? When Julian looked up again, his eyes were red. He gazed deeply into Summer's eyes, his own shimmering like a sea of stars, moist yet radiant. Chihiro, I've been thinking a lot during this time. I was a jerk. And I'm sorry for hurting you so much. I know nothing I do can make up for the mistakes I've made, but I still want to sincerely apologize to you. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I beg you to give me a chance to make it up to you. I no longer hope to be with you again. I just want to stay by your side and see you often. Please don't go to France, okay? Don't take away my right as a father. Give me a chance to take care of you both. I promise to do my absolute best to be a good dad. Nothing can replace a child's longing for a father's love. Actually, Julian and Summer are both children who grew up without a father's love. Julian's father was a good-for-nothing playboy. Even after marriage, he kept fooling around outside. Later, he eloped with another woman and went abroad, never to return. From childhood, Julian was forced to be the best among his peers. He just wanted his father to notice him. As he grew older, he realized that no matter how outstanding he became, his father would never look at him again. But he still pushed himself to be the best, believing that only by standing at the top could he make others look up to him. And he stopped hoping for anyone's attention. This is why Julian couldn't see the kindness others showed him, which led him to overlook Summer and her love for him. In fact, Julian's fondness for Yuki is also tied to his father. In his high school years, when his father eloped with someone else, it was Yuki who found him crouched in a corner, quietly wiping away tears. From then on, Yuki held a special place in his heart, which led to his blind trust in her and his failure to see her true nature. Julian's words touched Summer, as he voiced the concern that had been weighing on his heart. Would he also let his child grow up without a father, just like he did? No, deep down, he didn't want that. He knew that for a child, a father's love is something nothing else can replace. But he was powerless. He couldn't provide his child with a complete family. In truth, a significant reason why Summer fell in love with Julian at first sight was because Julian bore some resemblance to her father. Would she really let her child repeat her own past? Seeing the emotion flicker across Summer's face, Julian's eyes lit up with hope, as if seeing the warmth of the winter sun. In this world, I ask for nothing else. I just want to stay by your side and our child's, to watch our child grow up. Please, don't reject me, okay? Summer, Julian, Summer, Julian, Summer. Summer was able to say these words because he had no fear of Julian. As they were already divorced, the child in his belly was naturally his to decide, and even after the child was born, if Julian wanted to fight for custody, he would have no chance of winning. Given the child's young age, the judge would undoubtedly rule in favor of the mother. Moreover, his financial strength was no less than Julian's, so whatever Julian could provide for the child, he could too, offering the best living conditions and the highest quality educational resources. He would respect the child's wishes and ensure they grew up healthy and happy. This was Summer's confidence. Julian's sorrow wasn't about being unable to make decisions regarding the child, it was that Summer had drawn such a clear boundary between them. Still, standing here was already good enough. At least Summer wouldn't leave. Parker didn't know whether to feel happy or not upon learning that Summer had decided to stay in Rongqing. In any case, he respected Summer's choice and would fully support her as long as she was happy. After deciding to stay in Rongqing, Summer shared the news of her pregnancy with Grace. Instead of blaming Grace, Summer asked if she had considered what it would take to be a single mother. Summer smiled and told her that she had already made up her mind and would firmly walk the path she had chosen. Seeing this, Grace said nothing more. Deep down, she was actually quite looking forward to the arrival of her little grandchild. as people grow older, they tend to crave liveliness and the joy of being surrounded by family. Julian did not tell Linda about Summer's pregnancy. He was aware of the discord between Linda and Summer, to be precise. It was Linda who was unilaterally making things difficult for Summer. Julian was worried that Linda would cause trouble for Summer after learning about the pregnancy, and he also didn't want Linda to bother him about the child. He knew she would eventually pressure him to fight Summer for custody. However, Julian never had such intentions. What he wanted wasn't the child, but the mother. Summer continued to work at Shunyi Group as usual. Unlike some pregnant women who experience severe morning sickness, the baby in her belly seemed to understand how hard its mother was working and behaved very well. After becoming pregnant, her sleep actually improved, and her skin became even more radiant. Julian now had a reason to linger around Summer. Today Summer left work a little early because it was the birthday banquet for Old Master Pei, and she needed to change into formal attire. She arrived early at the foot of Shunyi Group's building, waiting for Summer. Old Master Pei had always treated Summer like his own granddaughter, so no matter what, she would attend his birthday banquet. Julian also came to Shunyi Group's building today to pick up Summer, but unfortunately, he missed her. The two met again at Old Master Pei's birthday banquet. Summer wore a low-key yet luxurious champagne-colored evening gown, paired with a white shawl. Her beautiful long hair was simply tied up, giving her an elegant and refined appearance. Understated yet stunning, with a unique charm. As she entered the venue arm in arm with Pei Yang, she immediately drew everyone's attention. Not only were they a perfect match in looks, like a pair of jade figurines, but the mere presence of Shunyi Group's young lady and the Pei Group's heir standing together was enough to make them the center of attention. Meanwhile, Julian, who was standing on the other side socializing with others, couldn't help but tighten his grip on his glass. Summer and Parker went together to the inner hall to visit Grandpa Pei. Seeing his grandson standing with Summer, Grandpa Pei's face lit up with a bright smile. These two children had grown up under his watchful eye. He knew his grandson well, but he wasn't sure what Summer was thinking. If the two could end up together, it would be a powerful alliance between Shunyi and the Pei family. Most importantly, both families knew each other inside out, so there would be no reservations about their marriage. "Come here, let Grandpa take a look at you," Grandpa Pei said with a smile, waving at Summer. Summer walked over and sat beside Grandpa Pei, then took out a carefully prepared gift. "Grandpa, I know you love tea. This is a small token of my appreciation. Happy birthday." Grandpa Pei smiled as he accepted Summer's gift. "You're so thoughtful, unlike my own grandson, who only knows how to annoy me." "Grandpa, why drag me into this when you're praising her?" Parker interjected, slightly indignant. Grandpa Pei frowned and shot him a glance. "If you were more reliable and brought a girlfriend home, I wouldn't have to scold you." Then, he turned his attention back to Summer, his expression softening into a smile. "Qianxia, do you have a boyfriend?" Summer immediately understood Grandpa Pei's implication. She smiled awkwardly, while Parker remained silent. Seeing the two of them silent, Old Master Pei continued, "When looking for a boyfriend, you must find someone who knows you well and treats you right. Only then can the two of you last long." "All right, Grandpa, stop talking," Pei Yang interrupted. "If you keep going, you might as well just recite his ID number." He knew his grandfather was trying to set him up with Summer, but their relationship could only ever be just friends. After chatting with Old Master Pei for a while, Summer prepared to leave. His current condition required more rest, so he had no energy to socialize with the other guests. Pei Yang wanted to see him off, but Summer refused. After all, it was his grandfather's birthday banquet, and it wouldn't be right for the grandson to be absent. Summer walked out of the Pei family's villa. His driver was on the way to pick him up, but he had stepped out early to enjoy the evening breeze. After walking for a while, he noticed a car following him. At first, he thought it was just a departing guest and paid no mind, but after some time, he realized the car was slowly trailing behind him. When he turned to look, he saw a familiar black Maybach. As he turned, the car pulled up beside him, and the window rolled down to reveal a handsome face. "Get in, I'll take you home." "No need, I'd like to walk," Summer replied. Hearing this, Julian got out of the car and walked over to Summer. The driver continued to follow them slowly from behind. Summer no longer felt as resistant toward Julian, as Julian had promised not to fight for custody of their child or force him into anything he didn't want. So now, in Summer's eyes, Julian was simply the child's father and a co-parent. Why the sudden urge to walk? Are you in a bad mood? Julian asked. I just want to enjoy the evening breeze. It helps me sleep better at night. During this time, Julian made a deliberate effort to research precautions for pregnant women. He knew that pregnancy could lead to poor sleep, but he couldn't be by Summer's side all the time. Even if he wanted to help, he felt powerless. Shall I take you to a place where the evening breeze feels more comfortable? Summer thought for a moment and then nodded. Julian took Summer to the seaside, watching the rolling waves. Summer felt much more at ease. The words he had exchanged with the old man earlier kept echoing in his mind, as longtime close friends. How could Summer not know Parker's feelings for him? But since Parker never spoke of it, neither did he, and the two continued their relationship in unspoken understanding. Yet he always felt it was unfair to Parker. If nothing was said outright, Parker would never have the chance to move on. Summer only regarded Parker as his best friend and had never imagined the day would come when they might become strangers. Looking at the slightly troubled expression on Summer's face, Julian took a candy from his pocket and placed it in his palm. Staring at the candy in his hand, Summer glanced at Julian with a hint of surprise. Why are you giving me candy? Julian must have treated him like a child. Eating candy can make you feel a little better. Julian's words left Summer momentarily stunned. Once upon a time, he had said the same thing to Julian. He remembered back then, when he and Julian had just gotten married. Julian was still grieving over Silver Snow's departure. Gloomy and unresponsive every day, his cold face devoid of any emotion. Though Summer faced Linda's harassment daily, he still tried every possible way to bring a little joy to Julian. Eating candy can make you feel a little better. That's what his mother told him. It was right after the passing of Yun Fu, and Summer couldn't accept it for the longest time. He would cry at the thought of his father, and Grace would give him candy to ease his mood. Summer unwrapped the candy in his hand and put it in his mouth. A rich sweetness spread across his tongue, and even the sea breeze seemed to carry that sweetness as it entered his nostrils and flowed into his heart. Is it good? Julian looked at Summer with eyes full of anticipation, like a child waiting for praise. Summer curled his lips slightly and nodded. It's good. Julian also revealed a faint smile. Summer took off his high heels, holding them in his hand, and walked barefoot on the soft sand, letting the waves lap against his calves. Watching Summer so relaxed and carefree, Julian followed closely behind, gazing at his back, the smile on his face deepening. He truly wished the distance between them could always stay this close, and that time at this very moment could pass slower. Even slower. As they walked, Summer suddenly felt a slight movement in his belly. He stopped and carefully sensed the faint stirrings in his stomach. It wasn't his imagination just now. His belly really did move slightly. It was the baby inside him kicking, and this was Summer's first time feeling fetal movement. He found it utterly magical as he placed his hand over his lower abdomen, sensing the gentle flutters. Julian noticed Summer had stopped and was holding his belly. Immediately rushing to his side in concern, "What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell?" Summer looked up at Julian with pure joy in his eyes. He moved. Julian froze for a moment before realizing Summer was referring to the baby's kick. Julian, also experiencing fatherhood for the first time, was navigating many firsts himself. He carefully knelt down and asked softly, "Can I listen?" Summer nodded with a smile. Julian slowly moved his ear closer to Summer's belly, his hand gently supporting her waist, careful not to startle the little one. When his ear pressed against Summer's lower abdomen, he distinctly felt the rhythm of life, a sensation so novel it filled him with both joy and excitement. It was his first time experiencing something like this. Lifting his gaze to Summer, he was momentarily too overwhelmed to speak. Then, he slowly pressed his ear to Summer's belly again, eager to relive that feeling. Watching Julian like this, Summer couldn't help but laugh. She never imagined the formidable business tycoon could have such a side. If others saw Julian like this, they'd probably be utterly shocked. Seeing Vivian Summer again, "I never imagined it would be under such circumstances." He had just finished dinner with a client and felt some soreness in his legs from wearing high heels, so he decided to buy a pair of flats at a nearby mall. When he and Angela walked into the brand store he frequently visited, he spotted a familiar figure. At that moment, all the other sales staff were busy, leaving only him standing there, so he had no choice but to step forward and attend to Summer. Ever since that birthday banquet, not only had Lu Ji abandoned him, but even his own parents had disowned him, ashamed of the disgrace he had brought upon them, leaving him stranded in the country. To survive, he had no option but to take up a job as a salesperson here. With his qualifications, he could have landed a decent job, but most major companies were aware of the incident at the banquet, and no one dared to hire him. As for smaller companies, he wasn't willing to work there. The salaries couldn't meet his spending needs. It was better to work as a salesperson in a luxury store. With her looks, she might even meet a wealthy man, and then she wouldn't have to work another day, living comfortably for the rest of her life. However, what she didn't expect was that instead of meeting a rich man, she encountered Summer first. Summer felt no sympathy for Vivian's current plight. It was all her own doing. "Miss, what kind of shoes are you looking for? I can recommend some for you." Vivian forced a smile, suppressing her anger. Summer ignored her words and simply pointed to a pair of light tan flat leather shoes on the shelf. "Let me try these on," she said. Vivian took off the shoes and respectfully placed them in front of Summer. But the idea of helping Summer try them on was absolutely out of the question for him. Summer had no intention of making things difficult for him either. She knew there was some history between them, and someone as arrogant as Vivian would never stoop to serving someone he considered an enemy. The fact that he could even greet her with a smile was already a small miracle. So, Summer took off her own shoes and slipped on the pair of light beige flat shoes. It wasn't out of kindness. She simply preferred to avoid unnecessary trouble and didn't want to engage with Vivian any further. After walking a few steps in the new shoes and finding them comfortable, she paid for them directly. Vivian stood at the door, bowing respectfully as he saw Summer off. Watching her retreating figure, his arms hung stiffly at his sides, fists clenched tightly. It was all Summer's fault that he had ended up like this, yet he was powerless against her. Just now, when Summer was trying on the shoes, he noticed she had a slight difficulty bending over. Moreover, she had chosen flats and was wearing loose clothing. Could she be pregnant? And whose child was it? The next day, Vivian wasn't scheduled for work, so she stationed herself at the entrance of Shengye Group, intending to tail Summer. Summer being pregnant was a huge deal. Judging by the stage, she must already be 4 months along. At that time, he hadn't yet divorced Julian. And Julian had once told him that Summer couldn't possibly be carrying his child. But now, Summer was already so far along in her pregnancy, he must have cheated during his marriage to Julian. This was major news. Whether he sold it to reporters or told Julian, he could pocket a hefty sum. The thought made Vivian giddy with joy, as if she were about to strike it rich any second. Even if her eyes ached from staring at Shengye's entrance, she didn't care in the slightest. Heaven rewards the faithful. In the afternoon, he finally caught sight of Summer. Before he could even feel joy, another figure came into view. Julian parked his car by the roadside, and as soon as he saw Summer step out, he eagerly approached her. He took Summer's bag, holding it in his own hand, then carefully wrapped his arm around hers. Seeing Julian like this, Vivian found it both unfamiliar and unbelievable. In her eyes, Julian had always been a proud and dignified man, even at the height of his love for her. He had never shown such submissive behavior. What kind of bewitching tricks had Summer used on Julian to reduce him to this state? The tenderness in his eyes was palpable even from such a distance, making Vivian's heart ache with bitterness, her gaze burning with anger. Today is Summer's prenatal checkup day, and as the father of the child, Julian naturally has to accompany her. Ever since Julian heard Summer's fetal movements at the beach last time, he has been constantly excited. Treating Summer with utmost care, delivering food and drinks daily and being on call 24/7, whenever Summer attends any event, Julian is sure to be there. Although Summer doesn't allow him to reveal their relationship in public, he still hovers within 3 meters of her, ready to rush to Summer's side at the slightest sign of trouble. Summer tells him not to be so dramatic. She's just pregnant, not turned into a porcelain doll. But these words have no effect on Julian, who continues to do as he pleases. Seeing how stubborn he is, Summer realizes it's pointless to argue and simply stops mentioning it. The doctor found it a bit strange that the person accompanying Summer for the checkup today wasn't Parker. Since Summer and Parker both had outstanding appearances, he remembered them quite well. Julian noticed the doctor's puzzled look and recalled what the doctor had said to Summer and Parker during their last hospital visit. His possessiveness flared up instantly. "I'm the child's father," Julian declared with such a proud gaze and boastful tone that Summer just wanted to pretend she didn't know him. It was utterly childish, like a group of kids comparing themselves, with him acting as if he'd won the final victory. Summer is now nearly 5 months pregnant and has hired a professional nutritionist to plan her diet. As a result, only her lower abdomen is slightly rounded while her limbs remain very slender. It's barely noticeable as long as she wears loose clothing. She plans to stop going to the office after this week and work from home instead, as she doesn't want too many people to know about her pregnancy to avoid unnecessary gossip. Everything can wait until after the baby is born. After their hospital checkup, the couple has been staring at the ultrasound images of their gradually forming child, filled with joy. Standing in the corner, Vivian quickly snapped a few photos of this scene with her phone before storming off in anger. Summer now not only has Julian by her side but also a child on the way. Vivian was seething with rage. If it weren't for Summer, all of this should have been hers. It was Summer who stole her life. The next morning, Summer was still in bed when she was woken up by Angela's phone call. "President Yoon, check the trending topics now." Summer opened her phone and saw the bold headline. "President of Shangye Group pregnant before marriage, meddling in someone else's marriage." She clicked in and found photos of her at the hospital for a prenatal checkup the day before. However, the photographer had chosen a tricky angle, capturing only her face clearly while obscuring Julian's appearance. Just as Angela hung up, Julian's call came through. "I didn't arrange the trending topic," Julian explained anxiously. He had just seen the news and immediately called Summer to clarify. Worried she might misunderstand him, their relationship had just started to improve, and he didn't want it to freeze over again. If Summer thought he had intentionally leaked their relationship this way, she would surely cut ties with him, even if Julian didn't explain. Summer wouldn't have suspected him in the first place. Although they went to the hospital together, the photo only clearly captured his face. It was reasonable to suspect Julian, but Summer didn't think it was him. Having been by Julian's side for 3 years, she knew his cold and aloof demeanor, but his character wasn't the type to resort to underhanded tricks. Proud as he was, he simply wouldn't stoop to such methods. Hearing that Summer didn't suspect him, Julian was stunned for a moment before earnestly promising, "Don't worry, I'll definitely uncover the person behind this." The incident was clearly targeting Summer, and the perpetrator didn't dare to offend Julian. In truth, Summer already had a rough guess in mind. Julian wanted to remove the trending topic, but Summer stopped him. Since the matter was aimed at her, she intended to handle it herself. Summer tidied up, changed clothes, and went straight to the company to convene an emergency meeting. During the meeting, the shareholders had quite a few complaints about Summer's trending issue, implicitly and explicitly criticizing Summer for letting personal life affect the company. Summer simply sat in the chair with a faint smile, too lazy to argue with these old-fashioned folks. Seeing Summer's composed and unflustered demeanor, some couldn't sit still. The issue of President Yoon's needed to be addressed quickly to minimize the impact on the company. Indeed, the repercussions were severe. Shangye's stock was already showing a downward trend, and such problems never arose before President Yoon returned. After all, a woman is just a woman. Now the internet is buzzing with all sorts of rumors, saying our Shangye's CEO is pregnant out of wedlock, meddling in someone else's marriage. Whose child is this, anyway? President Yoon, you owe us an explanation. Vice President Yoon's words were rather harsh. The child is President Yoon's private matter and doesn't need to be discussed at a shareholders' meeting. Angela couldn't take it anymore and interjected, the so-called Vice President Yoon, hearing that Angela dared to contradict him, snapped angrily, "A mere secretary has no right to speak here." President Yoon's personal life is affecting the company, so I have every right to comment. Summer let out a cold laugh, meddling in someone else's marriage. Where's the so-called victim? These people will say anything to slander him. How dare they accuse her of interfering in someone else's marriage based on just a few photos, without even clearly seeing the man's face? Those who don't know the truth are spreading rumors, but don't all of you here know what kind of person Summer, everyone present here is a long-standing shareholder of Shunyi, and some of you have even watched me grow up. I address you respectfully as uncles and elders, so how could you say such hurtful things about me? As a woman, getting pregnant and having a child is my freedom. I haven't wronged anyone, and this matter has nothing to do with the company. Since someone is now using this to stir trouble, our priority should be to uncover the person behind it, not to have you questioning me about who the father of my child is. Summer's words instantly silenced everyone, and the noisy conference room fell quiet. After a while, Deputy General Manager Yu couldn't resist speaking up again. President Yoon, after all this discussion, you still haven't proposed a concrete solution. If this situation continues to escalate, it will have a significant impact on both you and the company. Summer shifted her posture, crossing her legs and resting one hand on the table, exuding an authoritative aura. Deputy General Manager Yu, do you have any good suggestions? I think you should step down from your position as president for now. First, distance the company from this matter, then hire a PR team to claim the pregnancy is baseless. You can return after giving birth, and by then, everyone will have forgotten about it. Hearing this proposal, the attendees began whispering among themselves. Summer couldn't help but clap her hands. Deputy General Manager Yu, that's truly a brilliant idea. Deputy Yu smiled and said, it's only right, it's all for the company's sake. Upon hearing this, Summer's smile instantly turned icy. It's just that your methods are a bit too unsightly. What do you mean? I'm only thinking about the company. Deputy Yu said sternly, I think you're only thinking about yourself, or rather, my Aunt Molly. If I step down, who will take charge? Molly. Hearing the name Molly, Deputy Yu panicked. Don't spout nonsense here. Deputy Yu was from Yunmore, and Summer knew it. The reason he hadn't removed him was to keep his enemies close and gain the upper hand. Molly had always held a grudge against him because of Eric. He knew that even if he removed this Deputy Yu, another Deputy Yu would emerge, so it was better to keep him around. The secretary stepped out to take a phone call midway and, upon returning, whispered a few words into Summer's ear. As Yoon Chenxia had suspected, it was indeed Molly behind it all. However, he hadn't expected the photos to be taken by Vivian. No wonder he didn't dare capture Julian's face directly. Vivian was well aware of Julian's methods. Though he hated Summer, he wasn't foolish enough to provoke Julian. What he didn't realize was that, compared to hatred, Summer was no less formidable than Julian. Having grown up by his grandfather's side, he had witnessed countless deceitful schemes in the business world. Hatred was merely a means of self-protection. Angela printed multiple copies of the evidence of Molly's collusion with Deputy General Manager Yu and distributed them to every shareholder. She also handed out proof of Deputy General Manager Yu's embezzlement and misappropriation of company funds over the years at Shengye. Seeing the documents in his hands, Deputy General Manager Yu's face showed shock. He had been so careful, how could Summer possibly uncover it? He had forgotten that while man proposes, heaven disposes, and there are no walls without cracks. If you do something, you must be prepared to be exposed. Soon after, the police arrived and took Deputy General Manager Yu away in front of everyone for his criminal involvement in embezzlement. Meanwhile, at home, Molly, upon learning of his plan's failure, slammed the table and threw things in rage. That bitch Summer not only sent his son to prison but had now also removed his only insider in the company. It was all because the old man was biased, leaving the company to Summer when it should have been his son's. Years ago, Molly had chosen to marry a live-in son-in-law precisely to secure control of the company. His elder brother had died young, but he never expected the old man to bypass him entirely and pass the company to Summer. This grievance had festered in Molly's heart for many years. After Deputy General Manager Yu was taken away, the meeting continued, as the issue was still unresolved. Although Summer had been framed, with the online rumors branding her as a mistress orchestrated by Deputy General Manager Yu, the damage was already done, and a solution was still needed. While they were in the meeting, the online discourse had undergone a dramatic shift. Angela, noticing this, quickly pulled up the current online activity on the conference room's large screen. Seeing the content displayed, Summer felt an indescribable mix of emotions. Julian had posted a clarification statement. "The child is mine, it was a consensual relationship. I pursued him." Accompanying the statement was a photo of the two together by the seaside, showcasing a striking couple. Moreover, one was the CEO of Tianzi Group, and the other was the CEO of Shengye Group, a powerful alliance by any measure. The derogatory comments labeling Summer as the other woman were quickly buried, replaced by an outpouring of unanimous blessings. In truth, this approach was undoubtedly the best possible outcome. Any public relations maneuver would have faced public skepticism. Julian's method, however, made it clear to everyone that it was all just a misunderstanding, while also giving the child a definitive identity. With the matter resolved, everyone dispersed. But Summer remained seated in the conference room, lost in thought. Julian's actions had resolved the issues between him and Shengye, but they had also thrust him into the public eye. Just then, Summer's phone rang. It was Grace, who had also seen the news online. Summer had never told Grace who the child's father was. Now that everything was out in the open, he naturally had to return and explain things to Grace. As soon as he stepped out of the conference room door, he saw Lou waiting for him at the entrance. "How long have you been waiting here?" "I've been here the whole time." While Vice President Yu was pressuring Summer about who the father of the child was, Julian was already here. "I'm sorry." Julian suddenly lowered his head and said weakly, "I'm sorry for acting on my own and making it public." Julian's voice grew quieter and quieter. Although Julian's actions resolved all the issues, he also had his own selfish motives. In the eyes of the public, he and Summer would now be seen as a couple. Summer had never imagined that Julian would one day apologize so timidly. The CEO of Tianzi had always been decisive and unwavering in his actions. There was never a situation where he made a decision and apologized to others for it. Seeing Summer remain silent, Julian thought he was angry and continued, "If you don't like it, once things settle down, I'll take the initiative to clarify our relationship and say we parted amicably. With the child staying with you, Summer didn't care what others said or thought, as long as it didn't affect his life." He looked at Julian calmly and said, "No need, sorry." He paused for a moment, then added, "Thank you." With that, Summer walked past Julian. Julian quickly followed Summer's steps. "Where are you going?" "Home." Julian and Summer returned to the Yun family together. He knew Summer was going home this time to explain the child's situation to Grace, and as the child's father, he naturally had to accompany him. Summer initially didn't want him to go, but couldn't resist Julian's persistence and had to let him. On the way, Julian called Lucas and asked him to prepare a gift and wait for him at the Yun family's doorstep. Lucas was highly efficient. Right after receiving Julian's call, he swiftly gathered the gifts as instructed. Julian and Summer arrived at the Yun family's home. Lucas had already been there for a while. Summer walked in and saw Grace sitting solemnly on the sofa, likely having waited there ever since she finished calling him. Summer walked over, sat beside Grace, and then wrapped her arms around Grace's arm, resting her head on Grace's shoulder to act coquettishly. "Mom, I didn't mean to hide it from you. I just hadn't figured out how to tell you yet." Grace was about to say something when she saw Julian walk in from outside, followed by Lucas carrying bags of items. "Auntie, hello." Grace sized up Julian from head to toe before finally recognizing him as Julian, the man for whom her daughter had run away from home and changed her name, the man who had taken 3 years of her daughter's youth only to leave her with nothing but a divorce certificate and a child. Her expression immediately darkened, and she refused to even look at Julian properly. "How dare you show your face here?" Facing Grace's questioning, Julian slightly lowered his head. Indeed, he had wronged Summer, and Grace's current attitude toward him was completely justified. "I'm sorry, Auntie, it's my fault for hurting Chihaya. I've realized my mistake now, and I'll make it up to Chihaya and our child 100,000 times over." Grace glanced at him. Though his attitude appeared sincere, she still couldn't bring herself to forgive Julian. No mother could forgive someone who had hurt her daughter. Grace showed Julian and the things he had brought to the door. She couldn't stand the sight of him. Julian, having been turned away, wasn't angry. He understood Grace's actions were warranted. If his own daughter were to encounter a man like his former self, he would surely act even more harshly than Grace. Watching Julian get frustrated, Summer couldn't help but feel a bit of schadenfreude. Seeing Summer trying to hold back her laughter, Grace was also annoyed by her. "What are you thinking?" Faced with Grace's question, Summer was a bit confused. "What do you mean, about Julian? Are you still planning to be with him?" Summer was momentarily flustered, then shook her head. "To me, he's just the father of my child, nothing more." Seeing her daughter speak like this, Grace didn't say anything more. She couldn't control the affairs of the younger generation. As long as Summer was happy and content, Grace would be satisfied. As for Julian, from the look in his eyes, Grace could tell he still had feelings for Summer. Ultimately, the outcome of their relationship wasn't something she, as a mother, could decide. "What about Parker?" Grace suddenly added. Summer smiled helplessly. "What does Parker have to do with this? Can't you see that child Parker likes you?" "Dear Mom, don't worry about these things. Parker and I are just friends. And besides, he's already gone abroad." After old Master Pei's birthday banquet, Parker confessed his feelings to Summer, but Summer rejected him. Parker hadn't really expected Summer to agree. He was being sent by old Master Pei to expand overseas markets, a mission that would take at least 2 years. He just wanted to give himself closure before leaving, and Summer's refusal was within his expectations. Still, it didn't matter, now that things were out in the open. The two remained friends. They had grown up and were no longer in that sensitive adolescent phase. Even if they couldn't be together, the bond they had built over the years remained intact. Upon hearing Summer's words, Grace felt regretful. Parker was a good person, and she would have been completely at ease if Summer could have been with Parker. Vivian was told by the manager the next day at work that she no longer needed to come in, and was informed that she had offended someone she shouldn't have. No place in Rongqing would hire her again. When she first brought the photos to Molly, Molly gave her a deposit of 100,000 yuan, so she went back to Molly's house to demand the remaining payment. But she didn't even get to see Molly and was chased out by the housekeeper. With no other options, Vivian had no choice but to leave Rongqing. Time passed quickly, and soon it was Summer's due date. Hearing Summer's painful cries from the delivery room, Julian and Grace outside the door were extremely anxious. During this period, Julian often visited the Yoon family to see Grace, persisting even when he was turned away. As a result, Grace's attitude toward him softened slightly. After more than an hour had passed, Summer still hadn't given birth. At that moment, the doctor emerged from the delivery room, and Julian and Grace immediately approached. "Doctor, how is my daughter?" Grace asked anxiously. "The mother is very weak and has fainted. The situation is critical now. You, as the family, need to decide. Save the mother or the child. Save the mother." Before Grace could react, Julian blurted out urgently. His face was pale, his emotions running high, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead. After learning the family's decision, the doctor returned to the operating room. Julian paced back and forth outside the operating room, his heart pounding relentlessly. His mind was flooded with chaotic thoughts, leaving him no peace. After another agonizing hour, the light in the operating room went off, and the door opened. Summer was wheeled out, followed by a nurse carrying the baby. "Congratulations, both mother and child are safe." Julian didn't hear the nurse's words clearly, nor did he glance at the child. Rushing straight to Summer, he tightly grasped Summer's hand, his pent-up tension finally releasing as tears that had long welled up in his eyes couldn't be held back any longer, rolling down his cheeks and dripping onto Summer's hand. Seeing the man before her with reddened eyes, Summer felt a surge of warmth in her heart. With difficulty, she raised her hand to wipe away the tears on Julian's face. "Don't worry, I'm fine." Julian nodded, but his hands holding Summer's still trembled uncontrollably. Seeing this scene, Grace couldn't help but tear up as well. Summer, witnessing the two in such a state, found it both amusing and heartwarming. During her postpartum confinement, Summer stayed at the Yoon family's home. Julian had already arranged for the most professional maternity nurse, and with Grace's care, Summer recovered quickly. Throughout this period, Julian stayed by her side every single day, making Summer wonder if Tienza had gone bankrupt. Otherwise, how could the CEO Julian have so much free time? Moreover, Summer didn't know what had happened, but Grace no longer seemed as resistant toward Julian. Instead, the way she looked at Julian carried a hint of a mother-in-law growing fonder of her son-in-law. Later, Summer took advantage of Julian's absence to quietly ask Grace the reason. Summer only then realized that on the day she gave birth, Julian had unhesitatingly insisted on saving her life over the baby's. Summer had always believed that Julian's feelings for her were merely due to his discomfort with her absence, prompting him to pursue her again. Later, she thought it was because of the child that Julian kept hovering around her, but as time passed, Summer realized it wasn't as she had imagined. Julian always considered her in everything he did. She could see that Julian had changed significantly during this time. No longer the domineering and arrogant man he once was, but instead gentle and considerate. Moreover, Julian knew she didn't want to dwell on the past, so he never brought it up in front of her or spoke of reconciliation, as if his only wish was simply to stay by her side, asking for nothing more. It wasn't until now, upon learning how Julian had resolutely chosen her in a life-or-death moment, that she finally understood. Julian wasn't he without desires. What he had always wanted was her, he just never said it outright, instead revealing it through countless small gestures. A month had already passed. Summer could have gone out long ago, but both Julian and Grace insisted he stay in confinement a bit longer for the sake of his health, so he remained active only within the estate. Julian was pushing the baby stroller back from sunbathing when he saw Summer standing on the balcony. He immediately handed the baby to the nanny and hurried upstairs. Nervously, he helped Summer lie down on the bed and tucked the blankets tightly around him. "Why are you standing on the balcony again? You mustn't catch a chill now." After saying this, Julian turned up the room's air conditioning by 2 degrees, then poured Summer a glass of warm water and placed it by his bedside. Watching Julian bustling around for him, Summer couldn't help but curve his lips into a gentle smile. Noticing Summer staring at him intently, Julian asked nervously, "What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell? Julian, do you still like me?" Faced with Summer's question, Julian pondered seriously for a moment before shaking his head. "Not just like, I love you, I love you." Hearing this, Summer's face blossomed into a bright, flower-like smile, as gentle and warm as the winter sun, shining into Julian's heart. Perhaps he could try starting over with the road for a few years. Not just for the child, but for himself as well. That's the end of today's story. If you like